The twin mounds of earth had settled over the years, no longer fresh wounds in the ground, but permanent fixtures on the small hill overlooking Ambrose Sullivan's ranch. 5 years had passed, yet the pain remained as sharp as the day he'd dug them. The wooden crosses, one taller, one smaller, leaned slightly with the prevailing winds weathered but still standing. Ambrose knelt in the dry grass, his weathered hands placing two wildflowers at the base of each cross. The purple desert bloom seemed almost defiant against the barren landscape of the Arizona-New Mexico border. The year was 1885, and the land remained as unforgiving as it had been when he'd first claimed it 15 years ago. "Another year, Eleanor," he whispered, his voice rough from disuse. Few words were spoken on the ranch these days, with only the occasional exchange when he ventured into town for supplies. Sarah would be 13 now. I wonder if she'd still be collecting those painted stones. He uncorked the small flask of whiskey, pouring a measure onto the ground before each grave. It was their ritual, his and Eleanor's, from the early days when they'd toast each small victory against the harsh land. Now it marked another year without them. The sun bore down, highlighting the silver streaking his once dark hair. At 47, Ambrose Sullivan carried the weight of his years in the lines of his face and the stiffness in his shoulders, remnants of old injuries from his time as an army captain. He remained tall and broad, though leaner now that Eleanor wasn't insisting he eat properly. As he knelt in silent prayer, a sound cut through the stillness, the unmistakable crack of a rifle shot from the southern edge of his property. Ambrose's head snapped up, his hand instinctively, reaching for the revolver at his hip. Another shot followed, then silence. He rose quickly, mounting his horse with practiced ease. "I'll be back," he promised the grave, spurring his horse toward the ranch house. The two-story structure came into view as he crested the rise. Built of solid timber and stone, it had withstood both natural elements and human conflicts. As he approached, something caught his eye. The front door stood slightly ajar. Ambrose slowed his horse, circling wide. He was certain he'd locked it before leaving for the cemetery hill. Dismounting quietly, he drew his revolver and approached cautiously. Years of military training reasserted themselves in his measured steps and controlled breathing. The porch boards, usually creaky, were silent under his deliberate tread. Inside, nothing seemed disturbed in the main room. The kitchen remained as he'd left it, a half-empty coffee cup on the table, but a trail of dark droplets on the wooden floor led toward the back of the house. Blood. Following the trail, Ambrose made his way to the storage room. The door was partially open, more blood smeared on its handle. With his gun raised, he pushed it wide. 3 women lay huddled in the corner, their native garments torn and bloodied. Apache women. The oldest looked to be in her late 40s, her face lined with pain, but her eyes alert, watching him with wary intelligence. Beside her, a younger woman in her 20s clutched a broken knife, her knuckles white despite her semi-conscious state. The third, barely more than a girl, lay curled protectively around her swollen belly, her breathing shallow. They hadn't been dragged here. They'd sought refuge. The blood trail led directly to his storage room from the back door, which he rarely used or locked. Ambrose lowered his gun slowly, his mind racing. He had fought against Apache warriors during his military service, had seen the aftermath of raids on both sides. The memory of burning villages still haunted his dreams, mixing with the flames that had taken his family. The oldest woman met his gaze steadily, neither pleading nor defiant. Something about her calm dignity made his decision for him. "I won't hurt you," he said, holstering his weapon. He knew they might not understand English, but his tone carried his intent. He approached slowly, kneeling to examine their wounds. The youngest was in the worst condition, her face bruised and swollen, her arms bearing the marks of a severe beating. The middle woman had welts across her back that could only come from a whipping. The oldest seemed less physically injured, but exhausted beyond measure. As he moved to check the oldest woman's pulse at her wrist, he noticed a small tattoo, a crescent moon symbol inked into her skin. Something about it tugged at his memory, but he couldn't place it. "Water," he said, miming drinking. "I'll be right back." In the kitchen, Ambrose filled a pitcher and grabbed clean cloths. His mind raced through the implications. Harboring Apache women could bring trouble from both sides, the army and the tribal warriors, but he couldn't turn them away, not in their condition, not with the youngest carrying a child. When he returned, the middle woman had awakened fully, her dark eyes fierce despite her weakness. She made a sudden lunge for a shard of broken mirror on the floor, but lacked the strength to reach it. Ambrose set down the water and cloths, making no move to stop her. "If you want to kill me," he said evenly, "at least eat something first. You'll need your strength." The unexpected response gave her pause. Her hand remained outstretched toward the glass shard, but her eyes studied him with new curiosity. The oldest woman spoke then, her voice low but firm in Apache. Whatever she said made the younger woman hesitate, then reluctantly pull back her hand. Ambrose soaked a cloth and gently cleaned the youngest girl's face. Her fever was concerning. In her delirium, she flinched away from his touch, whimpering softly. "She needs medicine," he murmured, more to himself than to them. To his surprise, the oldest woman responded in halting English. "We have plants. In pouch." She gestured weakly to a small leather bag that had fallen nearby. Ambrose retrieved it, finding dried herbs and roots inside. He recognized some from Eleanor's garden. She had studied native remedies, finding them often more effective than the doctor's treatments. Working together, he and the oldest woman crushed the herbs into a paste, which she applied to the girl's wounds, while he prepared a tea from another mixture. The cooperation created a fragile bridge between them, wordless but purposeful. As night fell, Ambrose moved the women to the spare bedroom, formerly Sarah's room. It had remained untouched since the fire, though the adjacent parts of the house had been rebuilt. He'd never had the heart to clear out the small collection of books and the toy horse he'd carved for her 8th birthday, the last she would have. The youngest slept fitfully, the middle woman refusing to close her eyes despite her exhaustion, watching Ambrose's every move. The oldest accepted his help with quiet dignity. "My name is Ambrose Sullivan," he said as he helped her to the bed. After a moment's consideration, she replied, "I am Talise." She offered no names for her companions, and he didn't press. Names were power and trust was scarce in this borderland. That night, Ambrose dreamed of fire. He always did on the anniversary. The crackling timbers, Eleanor's screams, Sarah's small form silhouetted against the flames as he rode back too late from his patrol duty. He woke with a strangled cry, sheets twisted around him, the taste of ash in his mouth. Unable to return to sleep, he took his flask and went to sit on the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered across the vast darkness like spilled salt. He took a long drink, welcoming the burn, when a soft movement caught his attention. Talise stood in the doorway watching him. Without speaking, she approached and sat on the step beside him. From a pocket in her tattered dress, she produced a small bundle of dried leaves. "For dreams," she said, offering them to him. "Better than firewater. This remembers. That," she nodded at his flask, "berries." Ambrose hesitated, then accepted the herbs. "Thank you." Talise looked up at the stars. "You're a woman," she said softly. "She taught." "Taught." Ambrose frowned, confused. "Words, reading." Talise's weathered fingers traced shapes in the air. "To women, to children. In secret." Ambrose stared at her pieces, slowly connecting. Eleanor had often ridden out alone, claiming to collect herbs or simply enjoy the solitude. He'd thought nothing of it. She'd always been independent, one of the qualities he'd loved about her. "How do you know this?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Talise's eyes reflected the starlight. "She showed us another way. Said words have power." She touched her temple. "Here, not just with weapons." The night wrapped around them, the silence broken only by the distant call of a coyote. Under the vast canopy of stars, Talise began to speak, her voice low and melodic despite her imperfect English. "Apache," she said, gesturing toward the house where the fierce middle woman slept. "Refused marriage to chief's son. Beat her. Said she dishonored tribe." She touched her own scarred wrists. "I taught children to read. Against law of elders. Books of white man forbidden." Her face softened as she mentioned the youngest. "Istas carries child. Father not of tribe. They say child has no place, no name." As she spoke, Ambrose noticed again the crescent moon tattoo on her wrist. In the starlight, he could see it more clearly, a moon embracing a small star. The image stirred something in his memory. "That mark," he said, nodding toward her wrist. "I've seen it before." Talise's eyes widened slightly. "Where?" "Eleanor had a journal with that symbol drawn in it. I never understood what it meant." For the first time, Talise's composed expression gave way to surprise. "You have this book still?" "Yes, I keep her things in a trunk." Talise leaned forward, urgency in her voice. "This book, important, shows connection. Connection to what?" "To us. To women who learn. Eleanor called us Sisters of the Crescent Moon." She touched the tattoo reverently. Symbol of change, of growing. Ambrose felt as though the ground had shifted beneath him. All these years he'd thought he'd known his wife completely. Yet here was a chapter of her life he'd never glimpsed. Eleanor secretly teaching Apache women to read, forming bonds across the divide that separated their peoples. "I'll find the journal tomorrow," he promised. They sat in silence for a while longer, the weight of revelation settling between them. Finally, Ambrose asked the question that had been nagging at him since he found them. "Who hurt you, your own people?" Talise nodded slowly. "Some believe old ways only way. Women who learn, who speak, who choose dangerous." Her eyes grew distant. "But others hunt us too. Your soldiers, your settlers. We are between worlds now." The vulnerability in her admission struck him deeply. These women existed in a precarious space, rejected by their tribe, yet hunted by his people. Just as he himself felt caught between his military past and his solitary present, belonging nowhere. "You're safe here," he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "For as long as you need." Talise studied him as if measuring the truth of his words. Then she nodded once a silent pact formed under the watching stars. Dawn broke with pale fingers of light stretching across the horizon. Ambrose had managed a few hours of sleep after his conversation with Talise, his dreams mercifully quiet after drinking the herbal tea she'd prepared. He rose early, habit ingrained from years of military routine. In the kitchen, he found Apache already awake, standing tensely by the window. She whirled at his entrance, a knife from his cutting block in her hand. "Good morning to you too," he said calmly, making no move toward her. He gestured to the stove. "Hungry?" Her expression remained guarded, but she lowered the knife slightly. Ambrose moved slowly, keeping his distance as he lit the stove and placed a skillet over the flame. He cracked eggs into a bowl, added a splash of milk, and began to whisk. "Talise told me your name," he said, his tone conversational. "I'm Ambrose." Apache watched him prepare breakfast, her posture gradually relaxing, though her eyes remained alert. When he placed a plate of scrambled eggs and cornbread on the table, she approached cautiously. "It's not poisoned," he said, taking a bite from the plate to demonstrate. "I don't waste good food on killing." A flicker of something, perhaps amusement, crossed her face. She sat and began to eat, her movements quick and efficient, like someone accustomed to seizing opportunities when they arose. Talise joined them as Ambrose was preparing a second batch. She nodded in greeting, her manner more familiar after their nighttime conversation. Together they prepared a tray for Istas, who remained feverish, but had improved slightly overnight. As Talise tended to the girl, Ambrose ventured outside to check his property. The morning air carried a hint of autumn crispness, though the sun would burn it away by midday. He walked the perimeter of the ranch house, his eyes scanning for any signs of intrusion. Near the south fence, he found what he was looking for: footprints too small for a man's leading from the desert toward his home. 3 sets, one dragging periodically, confirming the women had come on foot across miles of harsh terrain. But these weren't the only tracks. Fresher prints, moccasins made within the last few hours, circled his property. Someone had been watching the house during the night. As he followed the tracks, Ambrose discovered something embedded in his gatepost, an arrow with red feathers. Not shot there, but carefully placed, its meaning clear to those who understood such messages. He removed it just as Apache appeared in the doorway, her eyes fixed on the arrow in his hand, her body tensing visibly. Nashoda, she said the name like a curse on her lips. Who is Nashoda? War chief, hunter of those who leave. Her English was better than he'd expected, though heavily accented. He marks you now, says we are his prey, you are between. Ambrose examined the arrow, its craftsmanship excellent, its message deadly. How many warriors follow him? Enough. Her eyes met his challenge, clear in them. You should give us to him. Save yourself. Is that what you want to be handed over? Apache's chin lifted. I would rather die fighting than return. Ambrose nodded, respecting her resolve. Then we prepare. They'll come at night, most likely. Together they walked the property, Ambrose pointing out vulnerabilities, Apache suggesting defensive positions, with the tactical mind of a born warrior. Their cooperation was tentative but effective, built on the pragmatic foundation of shared danger. By midday they had fortified the windows with additional shutters and positioned water barrels strategically in case of fire, Ambrose's greatest fear. He brought out his Winchester rifle, checking its action and cleaning it thoroughly. Apache watched with interest. You know how to use this well? Army captain, 15 years, he replied, though I haven't shot at anything but game in a while. He offered her his old service revolver, a Colt Navy he'd maintained meticulously. She took it with practiced hands, checking the cylinder and balance. You've handled guns before, he observed. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. I watch, I learn. Not supposed to, but I do. Their preparations were interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Ambrose motioned for Apache to take cover, as he positioned himself on the porch, rifle held casually but ready. The rider who approached was a familiar figure, Sheriff Gideon Ramsey, a man in his 60s with a gray mustache and the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades under the southwestern sun. He'd been sheriff of the nearest town for as long as Ambrose had lived in the territory, and one of the few people Ambrose might have called a friend. Afternoon, Ambrose, Gideon called, dismounting stiffly. Thought I'd check on you, being the anniversary and all. Ambrose nodded in greeting, keeping his expression neutral. Appreciate it, Gideon. Coffee? Wouldn't say no. Inside, Ambrose was acutely aware of the women hidden in the back rooms. Talise had ushered Istas into a concealed storage space beneath the floorboards at the first sound of the horse, while Apache had slipped out the back to watch from the barn. Gideon settled at the kitchen table, removing his hat to reveal thinning white hair. His shrewd eyes took in the extra plates in the sink, the multiple cups on the drying rack. Got company, Ambrose? Just being lazy with the washing up, Ambrose replied, setting a cup of coffee before the sheriff. Gideon nodded, though his expression suggested he wasn't convinced. Heard some interesting news you might want to know about. Army's been stirred up lately. Seems a group of Apache women escaped from their reservation 2 days ago. Lieutenant Warren's leading the search party. Ambrose kept his face impassive, though the name sent a chill through him. Maxwell Warren had served under him years ago, an ambitious, ruthless young officer with a particular hatred for the native tribes. Any idea why they left? He asked, keeping his tone casual. Gideon shrugged. Usual reasons, I expect. Some dispute with their own people, maybe, or just tired of reservation life. He sipped his coffee, watching Ambrose over the rim. Thing is, tracks were spotted heading this direction. Lot of directions they could go from here, Ambrose commented. Most likely headed for the mountains. Most likely, Gideon agreed. But Warren's determined. Says these women are dangerous, stirring up trouble, spreading dangerous ideas. He leaned forward. Between you and me, I think he just likes the hunt. The sheriff's eyes drifted to the window, then back to Ambrose. You know how it is with the army these days. They're looking to make examples. Anyone harboring runaways would face serious charges. The warning was clear, though Ambrose couldn't tell if it was friendly or threatening. He and Gideon had a complicated history. They'd fought alongside each other in skirmishes against raiding parties, shared drinks and stories over the years. But Gideon had also been one of the men who'd held Ambrose back from rushing into the burning house 5 years ago. I appreciate the heads up, Ambrose said carefully. Gideon finished his coffee and stood, just looking out for an old friend. These are complicated times, Ambrose. Man's got to be careful about choosing sides. At the door, the sheriff paused. By the way, there's talk of Apache warriors off the reservation too. Hunting party, they say. His eyes met Ambrose's. You might want to keep that rifle handy. After Gideon rode away, Ambrose remained on the porch watching until the dust settled. The sheriff's visit had left him uneasy. It wasn't clear whether Gideon suspected anything or was simply passing along information. Either way, the noose was tightening. Apache emerged from the barn, moving silently to join him. He knows, she stated flatly. Maybe, Ambrose agreed. Or he's guessing. What will you do? Ambrose considered the question. The logical choice, the safe choice, would be to send the women away. But the image of Istas's feverish face, of Talisa's quiet dignity, of Apache's fierce determination, made that impossible. We prepare, he said simply, and we watch for both sides. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Talis helped Istas out to the porch for fresh air. The girl was still weak, but no longer delirious, her dark eyes taking in her surroundings with wary curiosity. Ambrose brought them water, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. Istas flinched when he approached, curling protectively around her swollen belly. It's all right, Talis assured her in Apache, then switched to English for Ambrose's benefit. She has not known kindness from men. Istas's gaze dropped to Ambrose's hands, calloused but gentle, as they offered the cup. After a moment's hesitation, she accepted it with a barely perceptible nod of thanks. As twilight deepened into night, Ambrose lit a single lamp in the main room, keeping the rest of the house dark to better see anyone approaching. The four of them gathered around the table, sharing a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and dried venison. We should leave. Istas spoke suddenly, her voice soft but clear, surprising them all. We bring danger to your house. Her English was careful, deliberate, as if each word was chosen with great consideration. The desert at night is more dangerous, Ambrose replied, especially in your condition. Istas's hand moved to her belly. My child is why they hunt us. No father of our tribe. They say the blood is wrong. The simple statement carried the weight of generations of tradition, of bloodlines carefully maintained. Ambrose thought of Sarah, of how he would have felt if someone had deemed her existence wrong because of who her parents were. No child's blood is wrong, he said firmly. Istas studied him, something softening in her expression. For the first time, Ambrose noticed how young she truly was, perhaps no more than 18, forced to bear burdens beyond her years. As night deepened, they took turns keeping watch. Ambrose insisted on taking the first shift, positioning himself by the front window where he could see the approach to the house. Apache reluctantly agreed to rest, though she kept the revolver close at hand. The hours passed slowly, marked only by the movement of stars across the sky. Sometime after midnight, Ambrose heard a soft sound behind him and turned to find Talis approaching with a cup of steaming liquid. For wakefulness, she explained, offering the herbal tea. He accepted gratefully. You should be resting. Old bones need less sleep, she replied with a faint smile. She settled beside him at the window, her presence companionable in the darkness. After a comfortable silence, she spoke again. Your woman, Eleanor, she was brave, came alone to our camp many times, brought books, taught letters. I never knew, Ambrose admitted. She said she was collecting herbs. She did that too, learned our medicine ways. Talis's expression grew distant with memory. She said knowledge belongs to all people, that children, Apache children, deserve to read stories, learn numbers. The image of Eleanor sitting among Apache women and children, patiently teaching them to read, filled Ambrose with a bittersweet pride. He'd always known she was remarkable, but this secret life of hers revealed a courage he hadn't fully appreciated. Did she ever mention a journal with your symbol in it? Talis nodded. She wrote names, places, drew maps of safe meeting spots. Her voice lowered. If soldiers find this book, the implication was clear. Eleanor's journal could expose others who had participated in these forbidden lessons. I'll find it tomorrow, Ambrose promised. It's hidden with her other things. Talis nodded gratefully, then turned her gaze back to the window. Nashoda will come, she said softly. Not tonight. He will gather more warriors first, but soon. We'll be ready. Talis's eyes, wise and knowing, studied him. Why do you help us? Your people would call us enemy. It was a fair question, one Ambrose had been asking himself since he found them in his storeroom. The answer came to him with surprising clarity. Because Eleanor would have, he said simply. And because I've seen enough death in my lifetime to know it rarely solves anything. Talis accepted this with a slow nod. You fought our people. It wasn't a question, but Ambrose answered anyway. Yes, as an army captain. 8 years ago, there was a skirmish near the White Mountain Reservation. Women and children died in the crossfire. He paused, the memory still painful. I left the army after that. Couldn't reconcile the orders with what I saw. You have seen both sides of the blade, Talis observed. Few men do. Their conversation lapsed into silence, each lost in private thoughts as they kept vigil through the night. Outside, the desert stretched vast and quiet under the canopy of stars, its stillness belying the dangers that lurked both on and beyond the horizon. Morning arrived with a crimson sunrise bleeding across the eastern sky. Ambrose, having finally allowed himself a few hours of rest before dawn, woke to the smell of coffee brewing. He found Apache in the kitchen, moving with surprising comfort around his stove. You know your way around a kitchen, he observed, accepting the cup she offered. I watch. I learn. She repeated her phrase from yesterday, a hint of pride in her voice. Not just weapons. Their tentative truce had evolved overnight into something approaching mutual respect. Atakai's initial hostility had given way to a practical alliance, though wariness remained in her dark eyes. After breakfast, Ambrose climbed to the attic where he kept the belongings salvaged from the fire. The trunk containing Eleanor's personal items had remained closed for years, too painful to examine. Now he knelt before it, running his hand over the scorched lid before finally lifting it. The scent of smoke still clung faintly to the contents, mingled with the lavender Eleanor had loved. Carefully, he lifted out her shawl, a hairbrush with strands of her chestnut hair, still caught in the bristles, a small wooden box containing her mother's cameo brooch. Beneath these lay her books, novels she'd read aloud on winter evenings, a volume of poetry, a Bible with pressed flowers marking favorite passages. And at the bottom, wrapped in a piece of silk, he found what he sought, a leather-bound journal, with a crescent moon embossed on its cover. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Eleanor's handwriting filled the pages, her graceful script detailing meetings, lessons, the progress of students whose names were recorded only as initials for their protection. Maps showed safe gathering places, notes on which army patrols to avoid which settlers could be trusted. And there were drawings, careful sketches of the crescent moon symbol in various designs, lists of Apache words, and their English translations, pressed herbs with medicinal properties noted beside them. It was a detailed record of a secret life, a bridge built between cultures by one remarkable woman. In the final pages, dated just weeks before the fire, Eleanor had written, "The children made such progress today. Elle can now read entire passages without assistance. T has a gift for mathematics that would astonish any schoolmaster. If only others could see what I see, the hunger for knowledge, the quick minds, the joy of discovery. Perhaps someday these secret lessons will no longer be necessary. Until then, we continue our quiet rebellion." Ambrose closed the book, overwhelmed by the revelation of this aspect of Eleanor he had never known. He had loved her for her kindness, her strength, her independent spirit, but he had never fully understood the depth of her conviction or the risk she had willingly taken. He carried the journal downstairs to where Talise waited. Her eyes widened at the sight of it, her hands reaching out with reverence to touch the embossed cover. "She kept her promise," Talise murmured, "to write everything, to remember us." As Talise paged through the journal, recognition flashed across her face at certain entries. "Here, this is me," she said, pointing to an initial T. "She writes of my daughter who learned numbers." "You have a daughter?" Ambrose asked. Talise's expression clouded. "Had. Fever took her 2 winters ago." She continued turning pages, then stopped suddenly, her finger tracing a name written in full, rather than as an initial, Nashota. "What does it say?" Ambrose asked, noticing her changed demeanor. Talise read slowly, translating from Eleanor's neat script. "Nashota shows remarkable aptitude for letters. Only 10 years old, but learns faster than the adults. His mother T is proud, but fears discovery by the father." She looked up at Ambrose, her eyes filled with complex emotion. "Nashota is my son." The revelation hung in the air between them. Nashota, the war chief now hunting them, the man who had left the warning arrow, was Talise's own child. "He was bright," she continued, her voice distant with memory, "curious about everything. But when his father discovered he was learning the white man's words, he beat him, said I was poisoning his mind." Her hands trembled slightly on the book. "After that, Nashota changed, rejected all I taught him, became more warrior than his father ever was to prove himself." "And now he hunts you," Ambrose said softly. Talise nodded, pain evident in the set of her shoulders. "The boy I raised is gone. The man who follows us now sees only betrayal, not love." The weight of her words settled over them, adding another layer to the already complex situation. This wasn't simply a matter of escaped women and tribal hunters. It was a mother and son divided by forces larger than themselves, trapped in roles that pitted them against each other. Their moment of revelation was interrupted by Atakai's urgent call from the porch. "Riders coming, many." Ambrose moved quickly to the window, rifle in hand. In the distance, a dust cloud marked the approach of several horsemen. Through his field glasses, he could make out at least a dozen riders, their painted faces and traditional dress identifying them clearly as Apache warriors. "Nashota," Talise confirmed, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "He comes to talk first. It is our way." "What will he want?" "Us. To return for judgment, or to die here." Her eyes met his. "You should let us go with him. This is not your fight." Ambrose checked his rifle, the familiar weight of it connecting him to his past as a soldier, to battles fought and decisions made. But this time he wasn't following orders. This time the choice was his alone. "Eleanor made it my fight," he said quietly, "when she chose to teach your people to build bridges instead of walls." He turned to where Atakai stood with the revolver ready, her posture that of a warrior prepared for battle. Beside her, Istas had emerged from the bedroom, her young face solemn but unafraid as she cradled her unborn child. "We face them together," Ambrose decided, "but we'll try words before bullets." As the riders approached, Ambrose positioned himself on the porch, rifle held casually but visibly. The 3 women stood behind him, not cowering but presenting a unified front. The message was clear: to reach them, Nashota would have to go through Ambrose first. The warriors halted a respectful distance from the house, forming a semicircle, with a single rider at its center. Nashota was younger than Ambrose had expected, perhaps 30, with a face that carried echoes of Talise in its high cheekbones and steady gaze. He wore the traditional dress of a war chief, his chest bare except for symbolic paint and a necklace of bear claws. A rifle rested across his saddle, and a knife hung at his waist. For a long moment, silence stretched between the house and the riders, broken only by the soft snorting of horses and the whisper of wind across the desert. Finally, Nashota spoke, his voice carrying clearly across the distance. "I am Nashota, war chief of the Eagle clan. The 3 women behind you are blood of the tribe. Now they are the cut." His English was flawless, a stark reminder of the lessons he had once embraced. "Give them back, and you will be at peace." Ambrose did not answer immediately, weighing his words carefully. "These women sought refuge in my home. I've given my protection. What crimes have they committed that warrant death?" Nashota's expression remained impassive. "Not your laws, ours. They have rejected the ways of the people. The old woman taught forbidden knowledge. The warrior woman refused her place. The young one carries impure blood. And for this they must die," Ambrose challenged. "For this they must be judged," Nashota corrected, "by the elders, as is our way." Talise stepped forward, then her voice clear in the morning air. "We have been judged already, my son, by men who fear women with minds of their own." Nashota's composure faltered briefly at being addressed as son before the other warriors. "You are no longer my mother," he said coldly. "You chose the white man's ways over your people." "I chose knowledge," Talise replied, "as you once did when you learned your letters at Eleanor's side." A murmur ran through the warriors at this revelation. Nashota's jaw tightened, his hand moving to his rifle. "Enough," he snapped. "I offer you one chance. Return with us now, or when the moon is full, we will come for you with fire." Apache moved to stand beside Talise, her voice ringing with defiance. "If you want to take my life, try. I will not die kneeling." Istas stepped forward last, her hands cradling her belly, her voice soft but clear. "This child has done no wrong, yet you would punish it for its blood." Nashota's gaze swept over the 3 women, then settled on Ambrose. "You do not understand the ways of our people, white man." "I understand right from wrong," Ambrose replied steadily, "and I won't stand by while women are punished for seeking freedom." The standoff stretched, tension crackling in the air like heat lightning. Finally, Nashota inclined his head, his eyes cold as winter stone. 4 days, when the moon is full. If they are still here, we return with more than words." With that, he wheeled his horse, the warriors following in formation. As they rode away, leaving a trail of dust across the blue sky, Ambrose turned back to the women. 4 days, he repeated, "so we have time to prepare." Apache nodded grimly, checking the revolver's cylinder. "I will not die easily." Talise stood watching the retreating figures, her eyes fixed on Nashota's straight back. "Nor will they," she said softly. "My son leads the best warriors of the clan." Istas alone seemed uncertain, her young face troubled. "There is still time to leave," she suggested. "To find another place." Ambrose shook his head. "Where would you go? The army is searching too. At least here we have walls, weapons, and warning." As they returned inside, the reality of their situation settled over them. 4 days to prepare for a battle they were unlikely to win. 4 days to find another solution if one existed. That afternoon, Ambrose took stock of their supplies. Ammunition was plentiful. He'd always kept a good store since the nearest town was a half-day's ride. Food would last a siege of several weeks, and the well in the yard provided fresh water. He'd designed the house with defense in mind, with thick walls and strategic windows that could serve as firing positions. But 4 people against Nashota's warriors. The odds were grim. As he cleaned his weapons on the kitchen table, Istas approached hesitantly. She had remained the most distant of the 3 women, speaking little and watching much. Now she stood before him, her hands twisted in her simple dress. "The small room upstairs," she began. "The one with the little horse." "Sarah's room." Ambrose supplied a pang of grief accompanying the words. "Your daughter." At his nod, Istas continued softly. "The books there, they are for children." "Yes, Eleanor read to her every night." Istas's eyes held a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "Could I see them?" The request surprised him. "Of course." He led her upstairs to Sarah's room, which remained largely as it had been, protected from the fire by its position at the far end of the house. The small bookshelf held volumes of fairy tales, adventure stories, and simple primers Eleanor had used to teach their daughter. Istas approached the shelf with reverence, her fingers hovering over the spines without touching them. "I learned some letters," she confessed, "from Talise, before they stopped her teaching." Her eyes found the wooden horse on the bedside table, carved with care and polished smooth by small hands. "Your daughter, she liked horses." "She loved them," Ambrose replied, the memory bittersweet. "Wanted to raise them when she grew up." Istas nodded, understanding in her eyes. "My child will be born soon. I hope it will have books and toys." Her hand moved to her belly. "I hope it will be free." The simple wish spoken in the quiet of his dead daughter's room struck Ambrose deeply. Here was a young woman, barely more than a girl herself, wanting for her child the same things he and Eleanor had wanted for Sarah: safety, opportunity, joy. "If I can help make that happen, I will," he promised. Istas studied him as if measuring the truth of his words. Then she reached out tentatively and touched his arm, the first voluntary contact she had initiated. "Thank you," she whispered. That evening, as storm clouds gathered on the horizon promising rare autumn rain, the 4 sat around the kitchen table planning their defense. Atakai had proven herself knowledgeable about tactics, suggesting positions and approaches that revealed her observation of many battles. Nashoda will come from 3 sides, she explained, using salt and pepper shakers to demonstrate. Warriors here, and here. Never all at once, they will test first, then commit. Ambrose nodded, impressed by her analysis. We'll need to conserve ammunition. Make every shot count. I can shoot, Atakai asserted. And Talise knows plants that burn the eyes blind temporarily. Talise confirmed this with a nod. We have some defenses they will not expect. As they strategized, the first drops of rain began to patter against the roof, quickly intensifying into a downpour. The sudden storm transformed the landscape, turning dust to mud and filling the air with the sweet scent of wet earth. Atakai tensed at a particularly loud crack of thunder, her hand instinctively reaching for the revolver. Ambrose noticed her discomfort but said nothing, allowing her the dignity of managing her own fear. When I was a child, he said casually, ostensibly to no one in particular, my father taught me to count between the lightning and thunder. Each second is how many miles away the storm is. He demonstrated counting steadily after a flash until the thunder rumbled. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 4 miles away. Atakai watched him, then tried it herself after the next lightning strike. 1, 2, 3. The thunder came. 3 miles now, coming closer. That's right. Ambrose smiled slightly. Eleanor was terrified of storms when we first married. Counting helped her feel more in control. Gradually, as they continued the counting exercise, Atakai's tension eased. It was a small moment but significant. A fragile thread of trust spun between them. As the storm intensified, they moved to the porch to watch the rain transform the parched landscape. Water cascaded from the roof in sheets, turning the yard into a temporary lake. The desert plants seemed to straighten before their eyes, drinking in the rare moisture. Life-bringer, Talise murmured, extending her hand to feel the rain. In our stories, rain is the tears of ancestors who watch over us. Istas ventured to the edge of the porch, letting the rain splash her outstretched hands. For the first time since their arrival, she smiled, a small, tentative expression that transformed her young face. Atakai remained under the shelter of the roof, but her posture had relaxed, the constant vigilance momentarily set aside as she watched the cleansing downpour. Ambrose stood slightly apart, struck by the scene before him. His home, silent for so long, now held voices, movement, life. The rain washed away dust that had accumulated through weeks of neglect, revealing colors long faded. It was as if the land itself was awakening from a long sleep. And in that moment, watching 3 women, who had every reason to despair, finding simple joy in a rainstorm, Ambrose felt something shift within him, a crack in the wall he had built around his grief, allowing a sliver of light to penetrate. The storm continued into the night, drumming on the roof and rattling the windows. By mutual agreement, they all slept in the main room, taking turns standing watch. The rain provided a temporary security. Few would attempt an attack in such conditions, but vigilance remained necessary. During his watch in the deep hours before dawn, Ambrose heard soft footsteps and turned to find Talise joining him at the window. She carried Eleanor's journal, her fingers tracing the embossed moon on its cover. I found something, she said quietly, opening to a page near the end. About the fire. Ambrose's breath caught. What about it? Talise pointed to an entry dated just days before the tragedy. I fear we have been discovered. A man watched our meeting place today, not a soldier, but one of the settlers from town. He left before I could see his face clearly, but his horse had distinctive markings. Must warn T and the others to be cautious. She knew someone was watching her, Ambrose murmured, a cold dread spreading through him. And days later, the fire. The implications hung in the air between them. What if the fire hadn't been an accident, as he'd always believed? What if someone had deliberately targeted Eleanor for her work with the Apache women? There is more, Talise said hesitantly. Something I have not told you. Outside lightning flashed, illuminating her weathered face in stark relief. In that moment of clarity, Ambrose saw the burden she carried, the secret that weighed on her. I was there, she whispered. The night of the fire. The words struck him like a physical blow. What? Eleanor sent message, urgent meeting. I came alone under darkness. Talise's voice grew distant with memory. I saw smoke first, then flames. Tried to reach the house, but men were there watching, making sure no one escaped. Men who, Ambrose demanded, his heart pounding. Could not see faces. But one I knew by his horse's distinctive markings, as Eleanor wrote. Talise's eyes held immeasurable sorrow. I could not save them. I tried, but the fire was too strong, the men too many. Ambrose struggled to process her revelation. All these years he had carried the burden of guilt, believing he could have saved them had he not been away on patrol. To learn that others had been present, had perhaps deliberately prevented rescue. The men, he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. One of them, was it Red Wolf, Nashoda's lieutenant? Talise looked startled. How do you know this name? I've heard of him. A warrior known for his hatred of whites. Talise shook her head slowly. Not Red Wolf. The horse belonged to a white man. Her eyes met his, filled with regret for the pain her words would cause. The markings Eleanor described, a star on the forehead, 2 white socks. I have seen this horse in your town. Whose horse? Ambrose pressed, though part of him dreaded the answer. The lawman, Talise said softly. The one who came yesterday. Gideon. Ambrose couldn't believe it. Sheriff Gideon Ramsey? Talise nodded, her expression grave. I cannot be certain it was him that night, but it was his horse. The revelation staggered Ambrose. Gideon, who had pulled him back from the burning house, who had comforted him in the aftermath, who had helped search the ruins for survivors, could he have been involved? Why? He whispered the question directed more at the universe than at Talise. Why would he do such a thing? Some men fear change more than death, Talise replied. Your Eleanor changed things, taught our women to read to question. Some would see this as danger. Outside, the storm began to abate, the rain softening to a gentle patter. In the distance, the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, promising a new day. But for Ambrose, the world had shifted on its axis. Familiar landmarks suddenly rendered strange by this new perspective. If Talise was right, if Gideon had been involved in Eleanor's death, then everything Ambrose had believed for 5 years was a lie. The friend who had stood by him, who had just yesterday warned him about harboring the Apache women, might be the very man responsible for destroying his family. The revelation cast their current situation in an even more perilous light. If Gideon suspected the women were here, if he recognized Talise, they faced threats from all sides. We need to be ready, Ambrose said, his voice hardening with resolve. Not just for Nashota, but for whatever comes from town as well. Talise placed her hand on his arm, the gesture conveying both sympathy and solidarity. Truth is painful medicine, she said softly, but necessary for healing. As the first light of dawn filtered through the rain-washed windows, Ambrose stood at a crossroads. Behind him lay 5 years of grief and isolation, ahead a dangerous path of revelation and possible revenge. The choice he made now would determine not only his fate, but that of the 3 women who had unexpectedly become his responsibility. In the quiet of the breaking day, with Eleanor's journal open before him and Talise's steady presence at his side, Ambrose made his decision. Whatever came, whether Apache warriors or betrayal from those he had once trusted, he would face it. For Eleanor's memory, for the chance to right a wrong that had festered too long in darkness. And perhaps, though he scarcely dared acknowledge it even to himself, for the possibility of finding purpose again in a life that had long since lost its meaning. Morning arrived with tentative fingers of light stretching across a transformed landscape. The night's rain had carved shallow channels in the yard, leaving puddles that mirrored the clearing sky. The air carried the sweet mineral scent of wet earth and sage, a rarity in this arid country. Ambrose stood on the porch, coffee cup in hand, his mind still reeling from Talise's revelation. The possibility that Gideon, a man he'd broken bread with, shared whiskey with, trusted, might have been involved in Eleanor and Sarah's deaths, gnawed at him like a physical pain. He'd said nothing to Apache or Istas. No need to burden them with his personal vendetta when their own survival remained uncertain. But the knowledge simmered beneath his calm exterior, reshaping his understanding of the past 5 years. The sound of movement behind him heralded Apache's approach. She carried herself differently this morning, the previous day's rain having washed away some of her wariness, though vigilance remained in her posture. Horses, she said, pointing toward the northern ridge. 2 riders. Ambrose raised his field glasses, focusing on the distant figures. Army, he confirmed, recognizing the uniforms. Patrol, most likely. Looking for us? Possibly, or just routine. He lowered the glasses. Either way, best to stay out of sight today. Apache nodded, her expression darkening. The blue coats come then, Nashota. Enemies on all sides. Not all sides, Ambrose corrected. The mountains to the west are still clear. For now. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had learned early that safety was temporary at best. Inside, Talise was teaching Istas to make cornbread, the girl's hands tentatively mimicking the older woman's practiced movements. The domestic scene struck Ambrose with unexpected poignancy. How long had it been since his kitchen had held such simple activity? We should check your supplies, Talise said as he entered. Plants for medicine, for defense. Ambrose nodded. I have some dried herbs Eleanor collected. Not sure what's still good after all this time. Talise wiped her hands on her dress. Show me, I will know. In the small pantry off the kitchen, Ambrose pulled down a wooden box from a high shelf. Inside were dozens of small cloth bags, each labeled in Eleanor's neat handwriting: sage, yarrow, jimson weed, juniper berries. Some he recognized from Eleanor's treatments of minor injuries and ailments. Others remained mysterious. Talise examined each bag carefully, opening some to sniff the contents, discarding a few that had lost their potency. Good, she declared. Many still strong. These, she separated several bags, can blind, cause confusion if burned. These heal wounds, fight fever. Her methodical assessment reminded Ambrose of Eleanor's approach to problems, practical, knowledgeable, without unnecessary drama. The similarity between the 2 women struck him anew, another thread connecting his past to this unexpected present. Eleanor learned from you, he observed. Talise nodded. And I from her. She knew book medicine. I knew plant ways. Together more powerful. As they worked cataloging supplies and planning defenses, Ambrose found himself studying Talise's face for traces of Nashota. The war chief had his mother's high cheekbones and steady gaze, but where Talise's eyes held wisdom and compassion, her son's had burned with cold determination. Nashota wasn't always as he is now, Talise said, seeming to read his thoughts. As a boy, he loved stories, asked questions about everything. His father, a great warrior, wanted a son to follow his path, but Nashota's mind walked different trails. What changed him? Talise's hands stilled on the herbs. His father caught him with Eleanor's books, beat him until blood came from his ears. Said he would make him a man, not a woman who reads. Her voice remained steady, but pain shadowed her eyes. After Nashoda burned the books himself, became more warrior than his father ever dreamed, to prove himself. And now he leads the hunt against his own mother, Ambrose said softly. He hunts what he fears in himself, Talise replied, the part that once loved learning, that questioned the old ways. The insight gave Ambrose pause. How many men had he known who fought hardest against their own vulnerabilities? How many wars began because men feared what they did not understand? Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of breaking glass from the main room. Ambrose moved quickly, hand reaching for his revolver, only to find Apache standing over a shattered picture frame, her expression stricken. I'm sorry, she said, immediately bending to gather the pieces. It fell when I was checking the window. The photograph within the frame showed Eleanor, Sarah, and Ambrose in happier times, taken during a trip to town 3 summers before the fire. Eleanor's smile beamed from behind the cracked glass, Sarah's small face alight with childhood joy. It's all right, Ambrose said, kneeling to help collect the fragments. The picture isn't damaged. Apache handled the photograph with unexpected gentleness. Your family, she observed. The little one has your eyes. Sarah. Ambrose supplied the name, still tender on his tongue. She was 8 when she died. Apache's fierce demeanor softened momentarily. I lost a sister, same age, fever took her. She hesitated, then added, the elders said it was punishment because she asked too many questions during ceremonies. The simple statement revealed more about Apache's history than anything she'd shared previously. Ambrose recognized the pain beneath her matter-of-fact tone, the helplessness of watching a loved one slip away, compounded by others using the tragedy to reinforce their control. Eleanor never believed sickness was punishment, he said. She taught Sarah that asking questions was how we grow. Apache carefully placed the photograph on the table, free from its broken frame. Your wife was wise. In my tribe, wisdom in women is called dangerous. It's not so different among my people, Ambrose admitted, just hidden under finer words. The moment of understanding between them was interrupted by Istas's soft call from the kitchen. The cornbread was ready, its golden crust and warm aroma offering a temporary respite from the dangers that pressed in from all sides. They ate together at the kitchen table, the simple meal elevated by the rare feeling of companionship. Ambrose realized it was the first time in years he had shared his table with others, the first time the silence of his home had been filled with the quiet sounds of communal eating. After the meal, as Talise and Istas washed dishes, Ambrose took Apache to the barn to continue her firearms training. Her natural aptitude impressed him. She handled the revolver with growing confidence, her aim improving with each practice session. You're a quick learner, he observed as she reloaded the cylinder. I watched the blue coats at the fort, she explained. When they thought no one saw. Learned how they clean guns, how they shoot. A hint of pride colored her voice. I can learn anything if I watch long enough. Why didn't you leave the reservation sooner? Ambrose asked. Someone with your skills could have made a life elsewhere. Apache's expression darkened. My mother needed me. She was sick for many seasons. When she died last winter, there was nothing to stay for. She sighted down the barrel at an improvised target. And Nashoda wanted me for wife. The casual revelation startled Ambrose. Nashoda, Talise's son. Apache nodded, firing a shot that struck just left of center. His father arranged it. Said a strong woman would give strong sons. Her lip curled slightly. I refused. Said I would rather die than be owned. And that's why they're hunting you, Ambrose concluded. One reason. She lowered the gun, meeting his gaze directly. I also helped Istas escape, and I broke Nashoda's arm when he tried to force me. The admission hung in the air between them, another piece of the complex puzzle falling into place. Not only had Apache rejected tribal tradition, but she had humiliated the war chief in the process, a double transgression that explained the intensity of the pursuit. You're a brave woman, Apache, Ambrose said quietly. She shrugged, though a fleeting smile crossed her face at the compliment. Not brave, just tired of living in fear. As the day progressed, Ambrose continued fortifying the house and barn. He positioned extra water barrels on the roof as a precaution against fire arrows, reinforced shutters with metal plating, and established clear fields of fire from strategic windows. Talise worked with Istas in the kitchen, creating mixtures from Eleanor's herbs, poultices for wounds, teas for strength, and smoke bundles that would blind or disorient attackers if thrown into a fire. The 2 women worked in companionable silence, Talise's experienced hands guiding Istas's tentative ones. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds began gathering again on the horizon, promising another evening storm. Ambrose welcomed the prospect bad weather would make an attack less likely, buying them precious time to prepare. As he checked the perimeter, fence movement on the distant road caught his attention. A single rider approached at a leisurely pace, the distinctive shape of a lawman's hat visible even at a distance. Gideon, Ambrose muttered, his hand instinctively moving to his revolver. He hurried back to the house to warn the others. Sheriff's coming. Everyone inside out of sight. Talise caught his arm as the women moved to the hidden room. Be careful, she warned. If it was his horse that night. Ambrose nodded grimly. I'll get answers one way or another. He positioned himself on the porch, rifle within reach but not in hand, a delicate balance between readiness and provocation. As Gideon rode into the yard, Ambrose's mind raced with questions. How to confront a man about murder without revealing his hand too soon? How to read truth in the face of someone who might have been lying to him for years. Afternoon Ambrose, Gideon called, dismounting stiffly. His weathered face broke into a familiar smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. Quite a storm last night, wasn't it? Thought I'd check you hadn't washed away? Still here, Ambrose replied, keeping his voice neutral. Coffee. Wouldn't say no. In the kitchen, Ambrose moved deliberately, his back never fully turned to Gideon as he prepared the coffee. The sheriff settled at the table, removing his hat to reveal thinning white hair plastered with sweat from the ride. Expecting trouble? Gideon asked, casually, nodding toward the reinforced shutters and strategically placed water barrels visible through the window. Just being cautious. You mentioned Apache warriors off the reservation. Gideon nodded, accepting the coffee Ambrose placed before him. That's partly why I rode out. Lieutenant Warren stepped up patrols. Says he's got intelligence those Apache women are hiding in this area. Any idea where he got that intelligence? Something flickered across Gideon's face, too quick to name, but enough to raise Ambrose's suspicions further. Just rumors, I expect. You know how soldiers talk. Ambrose leaned against the counter, studying the man he'd called friend. The same man who, if Talise was correct, had watched his family burn. Heard an interesting story in town, Ambrose said casually. About Eleanor. Gideon's hand paused halfway to his mouth. Oh. Seems she was teaching some of the Apache women to read. Did you know about that? The sheriff set his cup down slowly. Can't say I did. Eleanor always was a soft heart when it came to the natives. More than soft-hearted, Ambrose pressed. She believed education could bridge the divide between our peoples. She kept records of her students' progress. He watched Gideon's face carefully. In a journal. The coffee cup rattled slightly against the saucer, a small tell but revealing. That so never knew she was the literary type. Oh, she loved books, kept detailed notes, names, dates, meeting places. Ambrose let the implication hang in the air between them. Interesting reading. Gideon's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Sounds like dangerous information in the wrong hands, especially these days with tensions high. Yes, Ambrose agreed softly. Very dangerous. Their eyes met across the table, the pretense of casual conversation falling away. In Gideon's gaze, Ambrose saw calculation, the weighing of options. In that moment, he knew with cold certainty that Talise had been right. You know, Gideon said finally, I've been meaning to ask if you've noticed anything unusual around your property lately. Tracks, missing supplies. Nothing worth mentioning, Ambrose replied evenly. Gideon nodded, draining his cup and standing. Well, I should get back. Storm's brewing and these old bones don't care for getting soaked. At the door, he paused. Word of advice, Ambrose. Whatever you think you know about Eleanor's activities, best keep it to yourself. Some stories are better left untold. The thinly veiled threat confirmed Ambrose's suspicions more clearly than any confession. As Gideon mounted his horse, Ambrose noticed for the first time the distinctive markings Talise had described: a star on the forehead, 2 white socks. The final piece of evidence clicking into place. One more thing, Gideon, Ambrose called as the sheriff prepared to ride away. I've been thinking about that night, the fire. Gideon stiffened slightly in the saddle. What about it? You were first on the scene before I got back from patrol. Just happened to be riding by, Gideon said, his tone careful. Saw the smoke. That's right, Ambrose nodded. And you held me back when I tried to go in after them. House was already gone, Ambrose. Would have lost you too. That's what I've been telling myself for 5 years. Ambrose stepped closer, his voice dropping. But I keep wondering, how did the fire start? Eleanor was always so careful with the lamps. Gideon's face hardened. Some questions don't have answers, Ambrose. Best remember that. With that, he spurred his horse, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Ambrose watched him go, the confirmation of his worst suspicions settling like a stone in his gut. Gideon knew something, perhaps everything, about the fire that had taken Eleanor and Sarah. And now he suspected Ambrose knew too. As the sheriff disappeared over the ridge, Talise emerged from the house, her expression solemn. You confronted him. Not directly, Ambrose replied, but enough to let him know I'm asking questions. Dangerous, she observed. Now he will be more careful, or more desperate. I needed to see his reaction, to be sure. Ambrose's hand tightened on his belt. It was him, Talise. I saw it in his eyes when I mentioned your journal. Thunder rumbled in the distance, the approaching storm mirroring the turbulence in Ambrose's heart. 5 years of grief sharpened now by the acid of betrayal. The man who had comforted him, who had helped search the ruins, who had stood beside him at the burial, that same man had watched Eleanor and Sarah die. Why? He whispered the question that had haunted him since Talise's revelation. Why would he do such a thing? Talise's weathered hand rested briefly on his arm. Some men fear change more than death, she repeated her words from the night before. Your Eleanor changed things. Some would see this as danger. The simplicity of her answer struck at the heart of the matter. Eleanor's work teaching Apache women to read, building bridges between cultures, had threatened the careful separation between settler and native that men like Gideon depended upon. If the savages could read, could learn, could question, what then of the justifications for taking their land, controlling their movements, dictating their futures? He'll be back, Ambrose said grimly, and he'll bring Warren with him. Then we prepare, Talise replied, her calm resolve steadying him, for both storms. The rain began as they re-entered the house, fat drops splattering against the windows and roof. Atakai and Istas emerged from their hiding place, tension evident in their postures. He suspects Atakai stated not a question but an assessment. Ambrose nodded. He knows I'm hiding something, and now he knows I'm asking questions about the fire. We should leave, Istas suggested, her hand protective over her belly. We bring danger to your home. The danger was already here, Ambrose replied. Has been for 5 years, though I didn't know it. He met each of their gazes in turn. We're stronger together than apart. If we run now, they'll hunt us down separately. Atakai straightened the warrior in her, responding to his resolve. Then we fight, together. Outside, the storm intensified, rain lashing against the windows and thunder rolling across the valley. The wild weather matched the turmoil in Ambrose's mind as he grappled with the revelation of Gideon's betrayal. 5 years of grief had crystallized into a sharp-edged purpose: discover the full truth and make those responsible answer for it. But first they needed to survive the immediate threats Nashota's warriors, Warren's soldiers, and whatever scheme Gideon might be hatching. 3 days remained before the full moon, 3 days to prepare for a battle they might not win. As evening fell, bringing an early darkness beneath the storm clouds, the four gathered in the main room. Ambrose had lit a fire in the hearth, its warm glow creating a circle of light that held the gathering shadows at bay. The atmosphere was somber but determined, each person absorbed in preparations for the coming conflict. Talise sorted herbs into small pouches, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. Atakai cleaned the revolver Ambrose had given her, the metal gleaming in the firelight. Istas sat cross-legged on the floor, sewing small bags from scraps of cloth to hold Talise's herb mixtures. Ambrose found himself watching them, these 3 women who had appeared so unexpectedly in his life. A week ago, he had been alone, his days marked by routine and solitude, his nights by dreams of fire and loss. Now his home hummed with activity, with purpose beyond mere survival. Tell us about Eleanor, Istas said suddenly, looking up from her sewing. What was she like? The request caught Ambrose off guard. He had kept Eleanor and Sarah locked within his heart for so long, speaking of them only in the privacy of their graves. She was remarkable, he began hesitantly, fearless in a quiet way. She came west with me after the war, when most women would have stayed in the safety of the East. Built this place alongside me, board by board. The memories flowed more easily than he had expected, like a stream long dammed, suddenly finding a new channel. She loved learning, was always reading, taught herself about plants, medicines, respected knowledge wherever she found it. She respected our ways, Talise added softly. Did not try to change us, only to share what she knew. Ambrose nodded. She believed people were people regardless of where they came from or what language they spoke. He smiled faintly. Used to say the Creator didn't draw the borders on the map, men did that, and men could undraw them if they chose. And your daughter, Istas prompted, her eyes gentle. Sarah. Her name in his mouth felt both painful and right, like exercising a limb too long held still. She was sunshine, always laughing, asking questions. Had Eleanor's curiosity and my stubbornness. He swallowed hard. She would have been 13 now, a young woman, not a child. The fire crackled in the hearth, filling the silence that followed. Outside, rain drummed steadily on the roof, punctuated by occasional thunder. The storm had settled in for the night, wrapping the house in a cocoon of sound and moisture. My people believe, Talise said after a time, that those who leave us remain close, watching over us. That stars are the eyes of ancestors, rain their tears of joy or sorrow. Ambrose had heard similar beliefs before, had even envied the comfort they seemed to provide. But his own faith had been shattered the night he had returned to find his world in ashes. I want to believe they're at peace, he said. But sometimes I wonder if they can be with justice denied them. Talise's wise eyes studied him. Justice and vengeance walk different paths, though they begin at the same place. Sometimes those paths cross, Atakai interjected, her voice hard. Sometimes justice requires a warrior's hand. The 2 women's perspectives represented the choice Ambrose himself faced: seek understanding or retribution, the path of wisdom or the path of the warrior. Both called to him with equal strength. First we survive, he said, setting the philosophical question aside for more immediate concerns. Then we decide what justice looks like. As the evening deepened, conversation gave way to practical preparations. Ambrose checked and rechecked his weapons, distributed ammunition, and reviewed defensive positions with Atakai. Talise and Istas continued their work with the herbs, creating mixtures for both healing and harm. When exhaustion finally claimed them, they settled into their now-established sleeping arrangements, Talise and Istas in Sarah's old room, Atakai near the front door, where she could keep watch, and Ambrose in his own bed, though he slept little, his mind racing with plans and contingencies. The storm raged throughout the night, wind howling around the eaves and rain beating against the windows. By morning it had passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape. The yard had become a shallow lake, the corral a mud pit, and the road to town a ribbon of flowing water. No one will travel in this, Atakai observed, surveying the flooded terrain from the porch. Not until the water recedes. A day, maybe 2, Ambrose agreed. Buys us time to finish preparations. They worked through the morning, taking advantage of the temporary reprieve. Ambrose and Atakai constructed additional barricades, while Talise and Istas gathered fresh herbs from the garden plants, invigorated by the sudden deluge. By midday, the sun had emerged, steam rising from the saturated earth as the temperature climbed. The resulting humidity was unusual for the territory, creating a heavy, close atmosphere that pressed against the skin like a damp cloth. Ambrose was repairing a section of fence when he noticed Istas walking alone toward Eleanor's garden at the eastern edge of the property. The small plot had gone wild in the years since Eleanor's death, herbs and flowers growing in tangled profusion without her tending hand. Curiosity drew him to follow at a distance. He watched as Istas moved carefully among the plants, her fingers lightly touching leaves and blossoms with a reverence that reminded him of Eleanor's own approach to the natural world. When she became aware of his presence, she startled slightly, but didn't flee. "These plants," she said, gesturing to the garden, "they grow without care, yet they survive." "Eleanor would say they're stubborn like people," Ambrose replied, stepping closer. "Finding a way to live even when the conditions are harsh." Istas nodded, her hand moving to her swollen belly in an unconscious gesture of protection. "My child will be like these plants, growing between two worlds belonging to neither fully." The simple statement carried the weight of generations of conflict, of boundaries drawn and enforced, of children caught between cultures and forced to choose. "Or belonging to both," Ambrose suggested gently. "Taking strength from each world like these plants that Eleanor brought from the east, but that thrive in western soil." Istas considered this, her young face thoughtful beneath the bruises that were slowly fading. "I hope to see this child grow," she said softly, "to reach for the sun, not hide in shadows." The vulnerability in her admission touched something deep in Ambrose. This girl, for she was little more than that, despite her pregnancy, faced dangers from all sides, yet her concern was for her child's future rather than her own safety. "You will," he promised, the words emerging with unexpected certainty. "We'll make sure of it." Istas studied him as if measuring the truth of his commitment. Then she reached into a pocket of her dress and withdrew a small object, offering it to him with shy hesitation. It was a carved wooden figure, a horse similar to the one he had made for Sarah, but with distinctive Apache designs etched into its surface. "I made this," she explained, "for your daughter's spirit. Talise says gifts comfort those who have crossed over." Ambrose took the carving, emotion tightening his throat. The workmanship was crude but earnest, the small figure infused with meaning beyond its simple form. "Thank you," he managed. "Sarah would have loved it." They walked back to the house together, a fragile understanding forged between them. As they approached, Ambrose noticed Apache watching from the porch, her expression unreadable. When they drew closer, she nodded once to Istas, a gesture that seemed to carry approval. The day progressed without incident, the flooded landscape keeping potential threats at bay. As evening approached, bringing cooler air and the chorus of frogs awakened by the unusual moisture, Ambrose found himself on the porch with Apache, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of crimson and gold. 2 days until full moon," she observed, cleaning her knife with methodical strokes. "Nashota will come rain or no rain." "You know him well," Ambrose noted. It wasn't a question but an invitation to elaborate. Apache's hand stilled on the blade. "We grew up together. Before he changed." A shadow crossed her face. "He was different then, laughed more, asked questions that made the elders uncomfortable. Talise mentioned he loved learning as a boy." "Yes, until his father beat it out of him." Bitterness edged her voice. "After that, he tried to be what his father wanted. More warrior than any man in the tribe, more traditional than the elders themselves." "And he wanted you for his wife," Ambrose prompted, recalling their earlier conversation. "His father arranged it, said my strength would give him strong sons." She resumed, sharpening the knife, each stroke precise and controlled. "I refused, said I would rather die alone than live as property." "That took courage." Apache shrugged, though pride flickered briefly in her eyes. "Not courage, desperation. I had seen what happened to women who accepted such matches. They disappear inside themselves, become shadows." Her words revealed more about her character than any direct explanation could have. Her fierce independence, her refusal to be diminished, her willingness to face death rather than surrender her autonomy. In another time, another place, she might have been a leader, a teacher, a force for change. Instead, her strength had made her an outcast, hunted by the very people who should have valued her gifts. "If we survive this," Ambrose said, "what will you do? Where will you go?" The question seemed to surprise her. Perhaps she had not allowed herself to think beyond immediate survival, or perhaps she had never been asked about her own desires. "I don't know," she admitted. "There's no place for women like me in the tribe. And your towns are no better with different chains, but chains still." She tested the knife's edge with her thumb. "Perhaps north to the mountains. Live alone, hunt, be free." The loneliness of such an existence struck Ambrose forcibly. To be so alienated from both worlds that solitude seemed the only option, it was a fate he recognized all too well, having chosen a similar path after losing Eleanor and Sarah. "There are other possibilities," he suggested. "Places where a woman with your skills could make a life. Denver, San Francisco." Apache's expression remained skeptical. "Cities of white men. What place for me there?" "Eleanor had a friend in Denver, a woman doctor. She helps girls who need a fresh start, teaches them healing arts." He hadn't thought of Catherine Williams in years, but the memory surfaced now with surprising clarity. "She would value your knowledge, your strength." Something flickered in Apache's eyes, not quite hope, but perhaps the seed of it. "Perhaps," she allowed. "If we live." "When we live," Ambrose corrected gently. Their conversation was interrupted by Talisa's emergence from the house, her face grave. Istas's pains have started, she announced. The child comes early. Ambrose felt a chill despite the warm evening air. Is she all right? For now, first babies often take time. Talisa's experienced eyes held both concern and determination. But we must prepare. She is young, the journey was hard on her body. What do you need? Ambrose asked, already moving toward the door. Clean cloths, hot water, and privacy. Men should not be present at birth. Apache rose immediately, sheathing her knife. I will help. Inside, they found Istas pacing slowly around the main room, her face tight with discomfort but her eyes clear and focused. She acknowledged their entrance with a nod, but continued her careful circuit, one hand supporting her back, the other resting on her swollen belly. Walking is good, Talisa approved. Helps the child find its way. Ambrose busied himself heating water and gathering the cleanest cloths he could find, while Apache cleared the table and laid out Talisa's medicinal herbs. There was a practiced efficiency to their movements, each finding purpose in the crisis. As darkness fell, Ambrose retreated to the porch, respecting Talisa's instruction about privacy. The night was clear after the storm stars emerging one by one in the deepening blue. The moon, nearly full, cast enough light to illuminate the yard and the distant fence line. From inside came the occasional sound of Istas's labor, a muffled groan, Talisa's soothing murmur, the creak of floorboards, as the young woman continued her restless pacing. Ambrose found himself pacing too, his path wearing a groove in the porch boards as the hours stretched on. Midnight came and went, marked only by the moon's slow arc across the sky. Ambrose checked and rechecked his rifle, more from nervous energy than necessity. In the distance, a coyote called its lonesome howl, echoing across the valley. Finally, near dawn, the door opened and Apache emerged, her face drawn with exhaustion but her eyes bright. A girl, she announced, small but strong. Relief flooded through Ambrose. And Istas, tired but well. Apache's usual stoicism gave way to a rare smile. She asked for you. Inside, the main room had been transformed. Fresh herbs burned in a small clay bowl, filling the air with a sweet medicinal scent. Istas reclined on a makeshift bed near the hearth, propped up with pillows, her face pale but serene. And in her arms, wrapped in one of Sarah's old blankets, lay a tiny bundle. Talisa sat nearby, her hands busy with some final preparations, her expression that of a woman who had witnessed the miracle of birth many times but still found wonder in it. Come, Istas invited softly. Meet her. Ambrose approached hesitantly, oddly nervous in the presence of this new life. The infant was impossibly small, her skin a warm copper, her features delicate but distinctly native in cast. A shock of black hair crowned her head, and as Ambrose watched her tiny fist emerge from the blanket, fingers splayed as if reaching for the world. She's beautiful, he said, meaning it. In that moment, the child's mixed heritage seemed irrelevant. She was simply perfect, a new soul untouched by the conflicts that divided the adult world. I will call her Dawn, Istas decided, for she comes with the new day. The name seemed fitting, a symbol of beginning of light after darkness. As if in agreement, the first pale rays of sunrise filtered through the eastern windows, bathing the room in a soft golden glow. Dawn, Ambrose repeated, welcome to the world. The child's arrival shifted something fundamental in the atmosphere of the house. Where before there had been tension, preparation for conflict, and the shadow of past tragedies, now there was also hope, a future to protect, a reason beyond mere survival, to face the coming dangers. But those dangers remained. As the day brightened, Ambrose stepped outside to check the property. The floodwaters had receded considerably, leaving behind mud and debris, but also making the roads passable again. Their temporary isolation was ending, and with it their reprieve from external threats. He was checking the fence line when Talisa joined him, her face showing the fatigue of a night without sleep, but also the satisfaction of a difficult task successfully completed. The child is strong, she said, a good sign. Will Istas be able to travel if necessary? Ambrose asked, practical concerns reasserting themselves. Not today, perhaps tomorrow if we are gentle. Talisa's wise eyes studied him. You fear they will come before the full moon. Gideon won't wait now that the roads are clearing, and he'll bring Warren with him. Talisa nodded, accepting this assessment. Then we prepare as before, but now we have more reason to stand firm. The simple statement encapsulated the change the baby's arrival had wrought. Before, they had been defending themselves, their right to exist free from persecution. Now they were also protecting the next generation, a child who deserved a chance at a life unconstrained by the prejudices of either world. They spent the day in final preparations, Ambrose and Apache fortifying the house while Talisa tended to Istas and the newborn. The young mother was recovering well, her natural resilience asserting itself, though she remained too weak for any strenuous activity. By mid-afternoon, Ambrose's prediction proved accurate. The distant sound of hoofbeats heralded approaching riders not from the direction of town, but from the east where the Apache reservation lay. Nashota, Apache confirmed, peering through the field glasses. 6 warriors with him. Earlier than expected, Ambrose noted. The full moon is tomorrow night. He knows about the soldiers, Talisa suggested. Comes now to claim us before they do. They took their positions, Ambrose on the porch with his rifle, Apache at a side window with the revolver, Talisa inside, with Istas and the baby ready with her herb bundles for defense if the warriors breached the house. The Apache riders approached cautiously, spreading out to flank the house rather than coming directly up the drive. Nashota rode in the center, his bearing proud, his face painted with traditional war symbols. Beside him rode a warrior Ambrose hadn't seen during their previous encounter, a heavily muscled man with a scarred face and a necklace of what appeared to be human teeth. Red Wolf, Atakai identified grimly. Nashota's lieutenant, the cruelest of the warriors. The riders halted at a respectful distance just beyond easy rifle range. Nashota raised his hand in a gesture that was neither greeting nor threat, but a request for parley. Ambrose glanced at Atakai, who nodded reluctantly. "We hear him first," she agreed. "Then decide." Leaving his rifle propped against the porch rail as a show of peaceful intent, Ambrose stepped into the yard. Nashota dismounted and approached alone, his movements measured, his eyes constantly scanning for threats. They met in the middle ground between house and riders, each man alert, but controlled their postures, mirroring the tension between their worlds. "You have come early," Ambrose observed, keeping his tone neutral. "The soldiers search for the women," Nashota replied, his English as perfect as before. "Led by a yellow-haired lieutenant who enjoys the kill." "Warren," Ambrose confirmed. "You've encountered him before. He burned 3 of our villages last summer, called it pacification." Nashota's face remained impassive, but hatred flashed in his dark eyes. "I would claim what belongs to the tribe before he finds them." "These women don't belong to anyone," Ambrose countered. "They've chosen their path. Our laws are older than your fences, white man. The women have broken sacred traditions. They must return to face judgment." "And what judgment would that be?" Ambrose challenged. "Death, enslavement." Nashota's expression hardened. "Not your concern. This is tribe business. It became my concern when they sought refuge in my home." Ambrose held the war chief's gaze steadily. "When your mother trusted me with her safety." The mention of Talise as mother struck a nerve. Nashota's composure slipped momentarily, revealing the conflict beneath his warrior facade. "She is no longer my mother. She rejected our ways, poisoned minds with white man's words." "She loved you enough to teach you those same words," Ambrose observed quietly. "I've seen Eleanor's journal. You were her best student." Color rose in Nashota's face, anger, shame, or some complex mixture of both. "Lies," he hissed. "I am a warrior of the Eagle clan. I follow the old ways." "A warrior who reads Shakespeare," Ambrose pressed, recalling an entry in Eleanor's journal. "Who asked questions about the stars, about numbers, about distant lands." Nashota's hand moved to his knife, his control fracturing under the weight of these revelations. "Enough, you know nothing of me or my path." "I know your mother grieves for the curious boy you once were," Ambrose said softly. "The child who loved learning before fear and shame drove it from him." For a moment, something vulnerable flickered in Nashota's eyes. A glimpse of the boy he had been before his father's brutality, before the demands of tribal tradition, had forced him into the mold of the perfect warrior. Then the shutters came down, his expression hardening into the impenetrable mask of the war chief. "Tomorrow at sunset," he said coldly. "We come for the women. Be wise and step aside or die with them." He turned to go, then paused, adding with a hint of what might have been genuine warning, "The soldiers come from the south. Many men, many guns. They will show less mercy than we would." With that, he returned to his horse, mounting with fluid grace. The warriors wheeled as one, galloping away in a cloud of dust and thunder. Ambrose watched them go, his mind racing with the implications of this new development. Warren's forces approaching from the south, Nashota's warriors poised to attack from the east. They were caught in a vice that was steadily tightening. As he returned to the house, Talise met him at the door, her eyes questioning. "He knows about Warren," Ambrose confirmed. "Came early to beat the soldiers to the prize." "And?" she prompted, reading his expression. "I tried to reach the boy you described, the one who loved learning. For a moment I thought I glimpsed him." Ambrose shook his head. "But the warrior is firmly in control now." Talise nodded, sorrow etching deeper lines in her weathered face. "The boy is there still, buried deep but alive. I feel it." "Well, the warrior has given us until tomorrow at sunset," Ambrose said grimly. "But Warren may not wait that long." Inside, they found Atakai already preparing for battle, checking ammunition and positioning weapons near each window. Istas sat in a rocking chair by the fire, the baby Dawn asleep in her arms, her young face solemn but composed. "We heard," she said quietly. "They come from both sides." The simple statement captured their predicament perfectly. Enemies converging from east and south, no clear path of escape, and now a newborn child to protect. "We need to consider all options," Ambrose said, gathering them around the table. "Including surrender if it comes to that." Atakai's head snapped up, her eyes flashing. "Never. Death before dishonor." "Not for ourselves," Ambrose clarified. "For Dawn's sake. If the fighting goes against us, Istas might be able to surrender to Warren. A mother with a newborn, even he might show mercy." "You don't know Warren," Atakai argued. "He sees all Apache as animals. The baby would not change his heart." "And Nashota?" Ambrose turned to Talise. "Would he harm his own sister's child?" Istas looked startled. "Sister?" Talise nodded slowly. "My daughter who died, she was Nashota's sister. And yes, he might see the child spared but taken to be raised in the old ways, without knowledge of her mother, her heritage." The complexity of their situation seemed to grow with each new revelation. No clear path forward, no option without significant risk. "What about the mountains?" Atakai suggested. "We could leave tonight under darkness. The western pass is still clear." Istas is too weak for such a journey, Talise objected, and the baby too vulnerable to the cold night air. They debated various strategies as the afternoon waned, each plan revealing new flaws when examined closely. Stay and fight. They were outnumbered by both potential attackers. Flee the terrain in Istas's condition made that nearly impossible. Surrender to which enemy, and at what cost? As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Ambrose stepped outside for a moment of solitude. The beauty of the sunset seemed almost obscene against the backdrop of their desperate situation, yet he found himself drawing strength from it, this evidence that the world continued its cycles regardless of human conflict. He was still on the porch when Talise joined him, her quiet presence a comfort in the gathering dusk. "I have been thinking," she said after a time, "about Maheo." Maheo. The name was unfamiliar to Ambrose. The old chief, Nashota's grandfather. He remains the true authority, though age has weakened his body. Talise's eyes were distant, calculating. If we could reach him, speak to him directly. Would he listen after all that's happened? Perhaps. He is of the old school, yes, but also wise. He understands that change comes whether we welcome it or not. She turned to face Ambrose directly, and he would want to know about his great-grandchild. Great-grandchild. Ambrose felt as though he was constantly one step behind in this unfolding drama. Dawn is related to Maheo. Talise nodded. Istas's child was fathered by Kele Maheo's youngest son. The boy died in a hunting accident before he could claim her properly. Maheo refused to believe the child was his son's, accused Istas of lying to gain status. The revelation added yet another layer to their already complex situation. Dawn wasn't just any mixed-blood child, she was the great-granddaughter of the tribe's chief, a direct descendant of the leadership line. If Maheo acknowledged her, Ambrose began, it would change everything, Talise confirmed. The child would have a place in the tribe, and by extension her mother. But how do we reach Maheo? Nashota controls access to the reservation. Talise's expression grew determined. There are ways, secret paths known to the women who gathered herbs, and Maheo still honors the old customs. He will grant audience to anyone who brings the sacred bundle. Hope, fragile but real, began to take root in Ambrose's mind. If they could reach Maheo, convince him of Dawn's parentage, perhaps a peaceful resolution was possible after all. But time was against them. Warren's forces were approaching from the south. Nashota had promised to return at sunset the next day, and Istas remained too weak for any arduous journey. As night fell fully, stars emerging like scattered diamonds across the velvet sky, Ambrose made his decision. They would attempt to reach Maheo, not all of them, but a small delegation that might slip past Nashota's warriors and Warren's soldiers. A plan began to form, desperate but not without merit. Talise knew the secret paths to the sacred meeting ground where Maheo could be reached. Ambrose would accompany her while Apache remained at the ranch to protect Istas and Dawn. It was a gamble dividing their already small force, but facing both enemies head-on seemed like certain defeat. This at least offered a chance, however slim, of finding a solution that didn't end in bloodshed. As they discussed the details around the kitchen table, the atmosphere was tense but focused. Each person understood the stakes, the risks, the slim margin for error. Yet beneath the practical considerations ran a current of something almost like hope, the possibility that diplomacy might succeed where force would surely fail. We leave before dawn, Ambrose decided. Travel by the old creek bed to avoid being seen. With luck, we can reach the sacred ground by midday, speak with Maheo, and return before Nashota's deadline. And if there is no luck, Apache challenged, ever the pragmatist. Then you do what you must to protect Istas and the child, Ambrose replied gravely. The hidden room beneath the floorboard should buy you time if soldiers come, and if Nashota returns early, I will face him, Apache stated, her hand moving to the revolver at her waist. One last time. The finality in her tone spoke volumes about their shared history, about the complex web of emotions that bound her to the war chief. Not just rejection and defiance, but perhaps something deeper, a mourning for what might have been had circumstances been different. As they finalized their plans, the moon rose over the eastern hills, nearly full, a silvery harbinger of the deadline to come. Its light spilled through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor and illuminating their faces with an ethereal glow. Tomorrow would bring either resolution or conflict, diplomacy or violence, life or death. The scales could tip either way, balanced on the edge of a knife. But tonight, in this moment of fragile unity, the four of them, Ambrose, Talise, Apache, and Istas with baby Dawn, formed a circle of unlikely allies bound together by circumstance, but also by something deeper, a shared belief that there must be a better way forward than the endless cycle of violence and retribution that had shaped their world for too long. Outside, the night deepened, stars wheeling slowly across the vast canvas of sky. The desert had fallen silent, as if holding its breath, waiting to see which path they would choose, which future would unfold from the tangled threads of their shared past. Dawn arrived with a thin veil of mist hovering over the land, transforming the familiar landscape into something otherworldly. Ambrose stood on the porch, breath forming small clouds in the chill morning air as he made final preparations for the journey. Beside him, Talise adjusted a small pouch of sacred herbs at her waist, her weathered face composed but tense. The path will be difficult, she warned, nodding toward the western hills, not used for many seasons. But Nashota won't know it. Ambrose confirmed, checking his revolver before securing it in his holster. The Winchester rifle was already strapped to his saddle. Women's path, Talise explained. For gathering for secret meetings, warriors consider such work beneath them. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Their arrogance becomes our advantage. Inside the house, final preparations were underway. Apache moved with quiet efficiency, positioning weapons and supplies near strategic points. Her face betrayed nothing, but the set of her shoulders spoke of readiness, of acceptance of whatever might come. Istas sat in the rocking chair near the hearth, Dawn asleep in her arms. The young mother's eyes were solemn as she watched Ambrose gather his things. "You will reach Maheo in time," she asked, her voice soft but steady. "We'll try," Ambrose replied honestly. "No point in false promises now. The sacred ground is half a day's ride if we're not seen. And if Nashota finds you first?" The question hung in the air, its implications clear. Nashota would see their attempt to reach Maheo as a direct challenge to his authority, another betrayal to add to the list. "Then we face him," Ambrose said simply. "But our goal is to avoid confrontation, not seek it." Istas nodded, her hand gently stroking Dawn's dark hair. "Tell Maheo." She hesitated, then continued with quiet dignity. "Tell him his son spoke of him often, with respect, with love." "I will," Ambrose promised. The moment of departure arrived with the first true light of day. Ambrose and Talise mounted their horses, his sturdy bay gelding and a smaller pinto mare from the corral. The animals sensed the tension shifting restlessly beneath their riders. Apache stood in the doorway, revolver at her hip, Winchester in hand. Her eyes met Ambrose's, a silent communication passing between them, a warrior's acknowledgement of shared purpose and respect. "If we're not back by sunset," Ambrose instructed, "take Istas and Dawn through the hidden tunnel. Head for the mountains. Catherine Williams in Denver will help you if you mention Eleanor's name." Apache nodded once, accepting the directive without argument. They both knew the odds of reaching Maheo and returning before Nashota's deadline were slim at best. This might well be the last time they saw each other. With a final glance at the house, at Apache's stoic figure in the doorway, at Istas visible through the window with Dawn in her arms, Ambrose turned his horse toward the western hills. Talise led the way, her small form straight and proud in the saddle despite her years. They rode in silence through the misty morning, following a dry creek bed that provided some cover from distant observers. The horses' hooves made little sound on the sandy soil, and the lingering fog helped conceal their movements across the open terrain. As they reached the first rise of hills, Ambrose glanced back at the ranch house, now a distant rectangle of shadow in the clearing mist. The American flag he'd raised daily for years hung limp on its pole, barely visible at this distance. A strange thought occurred to him that he might never see this place again, this home he had built with Eleanor, where Sarah had taken her first steps, where he had buried his heart after losing them. Yet somehow, the thought brought more peace than pain. Whatever happened today, he was moving forward for the first time in 5 years, not merely existing in the shadow of loss. Talise led them up a narrow game trail that wound between jutting rock formations. The path grew steeper, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses at several points. Despite her age, Talise moved with surprising agility, familiar with every twist of the trail. "You've traveled this way many times," Ambrose observed during a brief rest. Talise nodded, her eyes scanning the terrain ahead. "For many years, this was the only freedom we had, gathering plants far from the men's eyes. We women created our own world in these hills." She gestured to markings on a nearby rock, nearly invisible unless one knew to look for them. Signs to guide those who know, warnings for those who should not follow. As the sun climbed higher, they reached a ridge overlooking a vast valley. From this vantage point, they could see both Ambrose's ranch to the east, and in the far distance the smoke from cooking fires that marked the Apache reservation. Talise pointed to a plume of dust on the southern horizon. "Soldiers," she stated grimly. "Moving fast." Through his field glasses, Ambrose could make out a column of cavalry, perhaps 20 men led by a figure on a white horse. "Warren," he confirmed. "They'll reach the ranch by mid-afternoon at that pace." The knowledge added urgency to their mission. They pressed on, descending into a hidden valley, where ancient cottonwoods grew alongside a spring-fed stream, an oasis of green in the arid landscape. Here, Talise called for another halt. "Sacred ground begins," she explained, dismounting. "We must prepare." From her pouch, she withdrew a bundle of herbs, lighting them with a small flint. The pungent smoke curled upward as she moved it around Ambrose, then herself murmuring words in Apache that sounded like both prayer and instruction. "For protection," she explained, "and respect. We enter Maheo's domain now." They continued on foot, leading the horses through a narrow passage between towering rock walls. The air grew noticeably cooler in the sheltered canyon, and the silence deeper, broken only by the occasional call of a bird or the soft snort of the horses. After perhaps half a mile, the passage opened into a circular clearing surrounded by stone monoliths that seemed placed by deliberate hands rather than natural forces. At the center stood a platform of flat stones, and upon it, to Ambrose's surprise, a solitary figure. Maheo. The old chief sat cross-legged on a buffalo robe, his face lined with the passage of many winters, his white hair hanging in 2 braids adorned with eagle feathers. Despite his advanced age, his posture remained straight, his dark eyes alert and penetrating as they watched the newcomers approach. "He was expecting us," Ambrose murmured, surprised. "He knows many things," Talise replied simply. The old ones see beyond what we see. They approach the stone platform slowly, respectfully. Talise leading the way with her head slightly bowed, Ambrose following her example. When they reached the edge of the platform, Talise spoke in Apache, her tone formal and deferential. Maheo listened without expression, his gaze moving from Talise to Ambrose and back again. When she finished speaking, he remained silent for a long moment, the only movement, the slight stirring of his white hair in the breeze. Then he spoke, his voice surprisingly strong for a man of his years. Talise translated for Ambrose. He asked why a white soldier comes to the sacred ground with the woman who broke tribal law. Ambrose stepped forward, mindful of maintaining a respectful distance. I come seeking peace, he said, letting Talise translate. For the sake of a child who belongs to both worlds. Maheo's eyes narrowed slightly at this, but he made a gesture for Ambrose to continue. 3 days ago, a child was born at my ranch, Ambrose explained. A girl named Dawn. Her mother is Istas of your tribe. Her father was your son, Kile. At the mention of his son's name, a flicker of emotion crossed Maheo's stoic features. He asked a sharp question, which Talise translated. He asks what proof you have of this claim. Istas says Kile spoke often of his father, with respect, with love. Ambrose met the old chief's gaze steadily. The child has the mark of your family, a small crescent moon behind her left ear, the same mark Kaylee carried. This detail, which Istas had shared just before their departure, caused Maheo to lean forward, his interest visibly heightened. He and Talise exchanged rapid words too quick for Ambrose to follow, even with his limited understanding of Apache. Finally, Talise turned to Ambrose. He says Kaylee did indeed love a girl before his death. He forbade it because she was from a lower clan. Now he wonders if Istas was this girl. And the mark, Ambrose pressed. More exchange between Talise and Maheo then. He says the moon mark has been in his family for generations. If the child truly bears it, she carries his blood. Hope kindled in Ambrose's chest. This was the opening they had sought, the possibility of recognition that might save not only Dawn, but her mother as well. But Maheo was not finished. He spoke again, his tone hardening. Talise's expression grew concerned as she translated. He says Nashota has already spoken to him of the women who fled. He has given his word that tribal law will be upheld. She hesitated, then added, Nashota did not mention a child. Would it have mattered if he had? Ambrose asked directly. Maheo seemed to understand this question without translation. His eyes still sharp despite his years studied Ambrose with new intensity. Then he replied, his words measured and deliberate. He says the child changes things, Talise translated. If she truly bears the mark, she is of his blood. But tribal law is still tribal law. The women have broken sacred traditions. What would justice look like? Ambrose asked. If not death, then what? This question prompted a longer response from Maheo, his hands gesturing as he spoke. Talise listened carefully, then explained. For Istas, if the child is proven to be of Maheo's blood, she could be accepted back as the mother of a tribal heir. For myself, exile rather than death in honor of my years as a healer. But for Atakai, she paused. Her offense is greater in the eyes of tribal law. She not only refused a match arranged by the elders but raised her hand against a war chief. Such actions traditionally demand blood. The situation was becoming clearer, though no less complex. Maheo might be willing to show mercy to Istas and Talise, but Atakai's fate remained sealed by tribal tradition, unless they could find another way. Ask him about the soldiers, Ambrose suggested. Warren and his men are heading for my ranch as we speak. What happens if they reach Istas and the child first? When this was translated, Maheo's expression darkened. He spoke rapidly, anger evident in his tone despite the language barrier. He says the yellow-haired lieutenant is a butcher who respects no boundaries, Talise translated. 3 moons ago, his men killed women and children during a raid claiming they were hunting warriors. Then we have a common enemy, Ambrose pressed. Whatever differences exist between your people and mine, surely we can agree that Warren is a threat to all. This struck a chord. Maheo nodded slowly, his eyes distant as if weighing possibilities. He asked a question which Talise translated. He asks what you propose. Ambrose took a breath, knowing his next words might determine all their fates. An alliance temporary but binding. Your warriors and I defend the ranch against Warren. In return, the women receive fair judgment from you directly, not from Nashota. Talise's eyes widened slightly at the boldness of this proposal, but she translated faithfully. Maheo listened, his expression unreadable. The old chief was silent for a long moment after she finished, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond them. Then he spoke, his words carrying the weight of authority. He says he will consider this proposal, Talise translated. But first he must see the child with his own eyes, confirm the mark, confirm she is of his blood. There isn't time, Ambrose argued. Warren will reach the ranch by mid-afternoon. Nashota plans to attack at sunset. We need to act now. More rapid exchange between Talise and Maheo, increasingly urgent. Finally, Talise turned to Ambrose, hope kindling in her eyes. He will send a messenger to Nashota, ordering him to delay any action until Maheo arrives, and he will come with us to the ranch to see the child himself. This was better than Ambrose had dared hope. Not a guaranteed solution, but a chance of reprieve that might give them time to find a peaceful resolution. And Warren, he pressed. The soldiers won't wait for tribal politics to be resolved. Maheo spoke again, his voice carrying unexpected force. He says the Blue Coats have no authority on tribal land, Talise translated. But your ranch is not tribal land. She hesitated, then added, he asks if you are willing to place your home under tribal protection temporarily. This would give him authority to oppose Warren directly. The request took Ambrose by surprise. Place his ranch American soil, his legal property, under Apache authority. It was unprecedented, possibly treasonous in the eyes of the U.S. government. Yet it might be the only way to create a united front against Warren to protect Istas and her child. Yes, he decided. Tell him yes, whatever it takes to keep them safe. When this was translated, Maheo nodded once decisively. He spoke a command, and from the shadows of the surrounding rocks emerged two young warriors Ambrose hadn't noticed before. The old chief had not come to the sacred ground alone after all. Rapid instructions were given. One warrior mounted and rode swiftly away, presumably to deliver Maheo's message to Nashota. The other helped the old chief to his feet and led forward a magnificent painted horse that had been hidden among the rocks. Despite his age, Maheo mounted with dignity, his back straight, his bearing that of a man accustomed to command. He spoke again, gesturing toward the east. He says we ride now, Talise translated. Every moment counts. They set off at a pace that surprised Ambrose given Maheo's advanced years. The old chief rode with the confidence of a lifetime spent on horseback, leading them along a different trail than the one they had ascended, more direct, but also more exposed. As they rode, Talise explained Maheo's plan in more detail. The chief would arrive at the ranch with full ceremonial authority, inspect the child, and if she truly bore the family mark, declare her under his protection. This would not immediately resolve all issues with tribal law, but it would forestall Nashota's attack and create space for negotiation. And Warren, Ambrose asked, will Maheo's warriors fight against U.S. soldiers if necessary? Talise's expression was grave. If they must. But Maheo hopes the presence of a tribal chief will make Warren hesitate. Even the army must consider the consequences of attacking a chief during a sacred ceremony. It was a gamble, but one with better odds than they had faced that morning. As they crested a ridge, Ambrose's ranch came into view in the distance. Through his field glasses, he could make out figures moving around the property, Apache patrolling the perimeter, alert for danger. But beyond the ranch to the south, the dust cloud had grown larger. Warren's cavalry was closing in, perhaps only an hour away now. The race was on. They pushed their horses harder, descending from the hills toward the flatter terrain of the ranch. Maheo rode slightly ahead, his white hair and ceremonial headdress making him a striking figure against the landscape. As they approached the ranch boundary, Ambrose saw Apache spot them. She raised the rifle, then lowered it as she recognized him. But her posture remained tense, wary of the Apache chief and warrior accompanying them. They rode into the yard at a gallop, dust swirling around them as they reined in their mounts. Apache emerged from the house, Winchester in hand, her eyes moving from Ambrose to Maheo with clear suspicion. It's all right, Ambrose called to her. Chief Maheo has come to see the child, to verify her lineage. Apache's gaze hardened. And then we stand together against Warren, Ambrose explained, dismounting. The chief has agreed to place the ranch under tribal protection. Surprise flashed across Apache's face, quickly replaced by skepticism. Nashota will not accept this. Maheo has sent a messenger, Talise interjected, helping the old chief dismount, ordering Nashota to delay any action until he arrives. And you believe he will obey? Apache challenged. It was Maheo himself who answered, speaking in Apache, but with a tone that required no translation, the voice of authority accustomed to being heeded. Apache's expression remained defiant, but she stepped aside, allowing them to approach the house. Inside, Istas sat by the window, Dawn asleep in her arms. When she saw Maheo enter, her eyes widened with fear and she clutched the child closer. It's all right, Ambrose assured her. The chief has come to see Dawn, to verify she is of his blood. Istas looked to Talise, who nodded encouragement. Show him the mark, she said gently. Let him see his granddaughter. With trembling hands, Istas adjusted the blanket, turning the sleeping infant slightly, to reveal the small, crescent-shaped birthmark behind her left ear. It was faint but unmistakable against her copper skin. Maheo approached slowly, his stern features softening, as he gazed upon the child. He leaned closer, examining the mark, then straightened, speaking words that seemed to catch in his throat. He says it is the mark of his family, Talise translated. The same his son carried, the same his father bore. She paused, then added with wonder in her voice, he acknowledges Dawn as blood of his blood. A visible change came over Maheo as he continued to gaze at the sleeping infant. The stern chief gave way to the grandfather, seeing in this tiny face echoes of his lost son. He spoke again, his voice gentler now. He asks to hold her, Talise translated. Istas hesitated, her protective instincts warring with the need to honor the chief's request. Finally, she nodded carefully, transferring the sleeping Dawn into Maheo's weathered hands. The old chief cradled the infant with surprising tenderness, murmuring words too soft for Ambrose to catch. A single tear tracked down his lined cheek, the first crack in his stoic demeanor. In that moment, the atmosphere in the room shifted. What had been a tense standoff became something more complex, a recognition of shared blood, of continuity despite conflict. Maheo was seeing not an enemy's child, but his own legacy, a connection to his son that he had thought lost forever. He spoke again, his voice regaining its strength. Talise listened, then turned to Ambrose with relief evident in her face. He declares Dawn to be of the Eagle clan under his personal protection, and by extension her mother as well. She paused, then added, He says the child bridges two worlds, and perhaps that is as it should be. This was the breakthrough they had hoped for. Dawn and Istas were now under Maheo's protection, safe from Nashota's judgment, at least temporarily. But questions remained about Talise and Atakai, and the immediate threat of Warren's approaching cavalry still loomed. As if summoned by the thought, Atakai called from the porch, "Riders coming from the south." Ambrose moved quickly to the window. Through his field glasses, he could see the cavalry column approaching perhaps 2 miles out, dust rising behind them in the afternoon sun. At their head rode a figure on a white horse, Lieutenant Maxwell Warren. "Warren," he confirmed grimly. 20 men at least, heavily armed. He turned to Maheo, who had handed Dawn back to Istas, and now stood with the straight-back dignity of a chief once more. Through Talise, Ambrose explained the situation: Warren's history of violence against the Apache, his probable knowledge of the women's presence at the ranch, the danger he presented to all of them. Maheo listened, his expression hardening. Then he spoke, gesturing toward the approaching cavalry. "He says this ranch is now under tribal protection," Talise translated. "The soldiers have no authority here without his permission." "Warren won't recognize tribal authority," Ambrose warned. "He'll see only Apache warriors and women he's been ordered to capture." "Then we must make him see differently," Talise suggested. "Show him the consequences of attacking a chief during a sacred ceremony." Maheo nodded agreement, then issued a series of commands to his accompanying warrior, who immediately mounted and rode east, presumably to summon additional warriors from the nearby hills. "The chief's personal guard waits beyond the ridge," Talise explained. 10 of his most trusted warriors. They will come when called." It was a small force compared to Warren's cavalry, but combined with Ambrose's defensive preparations, it might be enough to give the lieutenant pause, especially if Warren could be made to understand the diplomatic implications of attacking a recognized tribal chief. They moved quickly to prepare. Maheo, understanding the gravity of the situation, removed his ceremonial headdress and replaced it with the full war bonnet of an Apache chief, an impressive creation of eagle feathers and beadwork that he had brought wrapped in hide on his saddle. The transformation was remarkable. He seemed to grow taller, more imposing, years falling away as he assumed the full mantle of his authority. Ambrose positioned himself on the porch, rifle ready, but not aimed, presenting the image of a property owner defending his land rather than a man harboring fugitives. Atakai took position at a side window, out of immediate sight, but able to provide covering fire if needed. Talise remained inside with Istas and Dawn, ready to bring the infant forward if proof of her lineage became necessary. The warrior who had accompanied Maheo took up position beside the chief, silent but alert, his presence reinforcing Maheo's status. As Warren's cavalry approached the final stretch of road leading to the ranch, Maheo walked forward to stand beside Ambrose on the porch. The old chief's presence was commanding, his face set in lines of determination that transcended age and language. Warren reined in his horse at the edge of the property, signaling his men to halt behind him. He was a tall, lean man with cold blue eyes and a neatly trimmed blonde mustache. His uniform was immaculate despite the dust of travel, his bearing rigid with military precision and barely concealed contempt. "Sullivan," he called, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. "By order of the United States Army, you are harboring fugitives from the Apache reservation. Turn them over immediately." Ambrose stepped forward, keeping his rifle pointed downward but ready. "This property is currently under the protection of Chief Maheo of the Eagle clan," he replied evenly. "You have no jurisdiction here without his permission." Warren's expression shifted from authoritative to incredulous. "Have you lost your mind, Sullivan? This is United States territory. Apache authority means nothing here." "On the contrary," Ambrose countered. "Chief Maheo is conducting a sacred ceremony concerning his great-granddaughter born on this property 3 days ago. Under the Treaty of 1868, such ceremonies are protected even off reservation land." It was a bluff, stretching the terms of a treaty that Ambrose had only passing familiarity with. But Warren wasn't a legal expert either, and the presence of a tribal chief in full regalia created a complication he likely hadn't anticipated. Warren's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. His gaze moved from Ambrose to Maheo, recognizing the old chief from previous encounters. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face, quickly masked by renewed determination. "I have orders to return 3 Apache women to the reservation," he stated flatly. "I intend to carry out those orders, treaty or no treaty." "Your orders came from Fort Lincoln," Ambrose said. 3 days' ride from here. Chief Maheo's authority is immediate and present." He gestured toward the eastern ridge where several mounted warriors had appeared silhouetted against the sky, as are his warriors. This new development gave Warren visible pause. What had seemed a straightforward retrieval operation was becoming increasingly complex, with potential diplomatic ramifications that might reach beyond his authority as a lieutenant. "I want to see these women," Warren demanded, his tone less certain now. "Verify their condition." Maheo spoke then, his voice strong despite his years. Though Warren couldn't understand the Apache words, the authority in the chief's tone was unmistakable. Talise appeared in the doorway to translate. "Chief Maheo says you may enter alone unarmed to witness the sacred naming ceremony of his great-granddaughter. As a gesture of peace between our peoples," Warren scoffed. "Enter an Apache ceremony unarmed. Do you take me for a fool?" "I'll keep my sidearm as well," Ambrose offered. "Equal terms." A tense silence followed as Warren weighed his options. The appearance of more warriors along the ridge, Maheo's personal guard, responding to the summoning, added pressure to his decision. Finally, he dismounted, handing his rifle to his sergeant, but keeping his pistol holstered at his side. 1 hour, he announced. Then I expect the women to be turned over to my custody, ceremony or no ceremony. He strode toward the house, his posture rigid with contained anger and reluctance. Ambrose led him inside, where Istas sat with Dawn in her arms, Talise beside her. The young mother's face was composed despite her fear, her chin lifted with quiet dignity. Warren's gaze moved dismissively over them, then froze as he noticed the infant. "What's this?" he demanded. The report mentioned nothing about a child. "Born 3 days ago," Ambrose confirmed. "Daughter of Istas and Kaylee, son of Chief Maheo." Warren's expression remained skeptical, but a new calculation was clearly taking place behind his cold eyes. The presence of a newborn with direct lineage to a tribal chief created diplomatic complexities far beyond his original mission parameters. Maheo entered behind them, his imposing presence filling the small room. He spoke directly to Warren, his tone both commanding and explanatory, while Talise translated. "Chief Maheo says the child bears the mark of his family, a crescent moon behind the ear. She is of his blood, and therefore under his protection. He has come to perform the sacred naming ceremony, which cannot be interrupted without grave consequences for all involved." To demonstrate, Istas gently turned Dawn, revealing the small birthmark. Warren leaned closer, his brow furrowing as he examined the evidence. "This changes nothing," he insisted, straightening. "My orders are to return the women to the reservation. The child can accompany its mother." "The child is of the chief's bloodline," Talise countered. "To force her return under these circumstances would violate not only the treaty but sacred tribal law. It would be seen as an act of war." Warren's jaw tightened. "Do not threaten me, woman." "Not a threat," Ambrose interjected calmly. "A statement of fact. You're a military man, Lieutenant. You understand the importance of proper intelligence before engaging in action. Your orders were based on incomplete information. The situation has changed." A muscle twitched in Warren's cheek as he considered this. His gaze moved from the infant to Istas to Talise and finally rested on Apache, who had entered silently from her position at the window. His eyes narrowed in recognition. "This one," he said, pointing to Apache. "She's wanted for attacking a tribal official. Nashoda himself filed the complaint with the Indian agent." "A matter for tribal justice," Talise replied smoothly, "which Chief Maheo is here to administer." The standoff continued, tension crackling in the air like heat lightning. Outside, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains. Soon it would be sunset, the deadline Nashoda had set for his return. As if summoned by the thought, a new sound reached them, hoofbeats approaching from the east. Many horses moving at speed. Apache moved to the window. "Nashoda," she confirmed grimly, "and at least 15 warriors." The situation had just become exponentially more complex. Warren's cavalry to the south, Nashoda's warriors to the east, and caught between them the ranch house with its unlikely assemblage of allies. Warren's hand moved instinctively toward his holster. "What treachery is this?" "No treachery," Ambrose assured him, though his own concern had spiked. "Nashoda was expected, though not with so many warriors. He comes to witness the ceremony as well." It was another bluff, but one they needed Warren to believe if they were to avoid immediate violence. The lieutenant's presence actually offered a strange advantage. Nashoda would be less likely to attack openly with U.S. cavalry as witnesses, just as Warren was constrained by Maheo's presence. Maheo himself showed no surprise at his grandson's approach. He spoke briefly to Talise, who nodded and translated for the others. "The chief says Nashoda has received his message but comes with warriors anyway. This shows disrespect but not necessarily disobedience. He will deal with his grandson." With that, Maheo strode out onto the porch, his war bonnet catching the late afternoon sun, transforming him into an imposing figure of authority despite his years. Ambrose followed with Warren close behind, clearly unwilling to let either man out of his sight. Nashoda and his warriors thundered into the yard, reining in their horses in a cloud of dust. The war chief's face was painted for battle, his chest bare, except for protective symbols drawn in red and black. Beside him rode Red Wolf, his lieutenant, similarly prepared for conflict. For a moment, no one spoke. The tableau held Maheo standing tall on the porch, Nashoda and his warriors facing him from horseback, Warren's cavalry, visible but holding position at the edge of the property, the setting sun casting long shadows across the yard. Then Nashoda dismounted, approaching the porch with measured steps. He stopped at the base of the stairs, looking up at his grandfather with a complex mixture of respect and defiance. "Grandfather," he acknowledged in English, perhaps for Warren's benefit, "you should not be here. This matter is for warriors to resolve." "This matter is for the chief to decide," Maheo replied, his voice carrying the weight of generations of authority. "And I am still chief of the Eagle clan." Nashoda's jaw tightened. "The women broke tribal law. Justice must be served." "Justice, yes. But what is justice?" Maheo's gaze swept over the assembled warriors, his voice strengthening. "Is it blood for every transgression? Or wisdom to know when traditions must bend to survive?" A murmur ran through the warriors at this challenge to orthodox thinking. Nashoda sensed the shift and moved to counter it. "The old ways have protected our people for generations," he insisted. "Weaken them, and we weaken ourselves." "The old ways will die if they cannot change," Maheo countered. "As the river changes course but remains the river." Their philosophical debate was interrupted by Warren, who stepped forward impatiently. This tribal discussion is irrelevant. I have orders to return these women to proper authorities. Nashoda's head snapped toward Warren, his expression darkening. You have no authority here, Bluecoat. These women are Apache. Their fate is for Apache to decide. For once we agree, Warren replied coldly. They should be returned to the reservation immediately. To face tribal justice, Nashoda clarified. To face whatever consequences your Indian agent deems appropriate, Warren corrected. The tension ratcheted higher as the two men faced each other, representatives of different forms of authority, yet united in their desire to control the women's fate. It was exactly the conflict Ambrose had hoped to avoid, with the ranch caught in the crossfire between tribal and military power. Maheo spoke then, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. He addressed Nashoda directly, speaking in Apache, but with enough force that his meaning was clear, even to those who couldn't understand the words. Nashoda's expression shifted as he listened, surprise, then disbelief, then a complex mixture of emotions too tangled to name. He replied sharply, questioning, his gaze moving toward the house where Istas remained with Dawn. Talise appeared in the doorway, translating the exchange for Ambrose's benefit. Maheo has told him about the child, about the moonmark. Nashoda demands to see for himself. This was the crucial moment. Would Nashoda accept the evidence of Dawn's lineage? And if he did, would it change his determination to punish the women who had defied tribal law? At Maheo's gesture, Talise retreated into the house, returning moments later with Istas. The young mother stepped onto the porch, Dawn cradled in her arms, her face composed, despite the danger surrounding her. Nashoda approached slowly, his expression guarded. When he reached the base of the steps, Istas turned the sleeping infant, slightly revealing the crescent birthmark behind her ear. For a long moment, Nashoda stared at the mark, his face unreadable. Then he looked up at Istas, something shifting in his gaze. Kaylee's child, he asked, his voice lower now. Istas nodded, once her chin lifting with quiet dignity. He promised to claim me before the tribe. But the hunting accident... Understanding dawned in Nashoda's eyes, the pieces of a story he had heard differently suddenly rearranging themselves into a new pattern. He turned to Maheo, speaking rapidly in Apache, gesturing toward Istas and the child. Talise translated for Ambrose. He asks if this changes the judgment against her. Maheo says yes. As mother of his great-grandchild, Istas falls under his protection. Her place in the tribe is secure. Relief washed over Istas's face, though she maintained her composure. One woman's fate was resolved, but questions remained about Talise and, most critically, Apache. Warren had been watching the exchange with growing impatience. This family drama changes nothing, he insisted. I have orders to return all three women. Orders based on false information, Ambrose countered. You were told they fled justice. In fact, they sought protection for a child of the chief's bloodline. Warren's cold eyes narrowed. And the one called Apache, what tribal protection extends to her? It was the question they had all been avoiding, the most difficult piece of the puzzle to resolve. Apache had not only fled the tribe, but had raised her hand against Nashoda himself, an offense that traditional tribal law punished severely. As if summoned by the mention of her name, Apache appeared in the doorway. She had changed into traditional dress, her hair braided with leather thongs, her bearing proud and unapologetic as she faced those who would judge her. Nashoda's expression hardened at the sight of her. She attacked me, he stated flatly. Broke sacred law. The punishment is clear. Apache descended the steps, slowly stopping beside Istas. Her gaze met Nashoda's directly, neither flinching nor showing submission. I broke no law that deserves death, she said clearly. I defended myself against force. I chose my own path. The tribe chose your path, Nashoda countered, as is our way. A way that silences women, Apache challenged, that treats us as property to be traded, not people with minds and hearts. Her words struck at the heart of the conflict, not just her personal defiance, but the larger question of tradition versus change, of individual choice versus community authority. It was a debate that had divided the tribe for generations, now brought to a head in this confrontation. Maheo listened to the exchange with keen attention, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. Then he spoke, addressing Nashoda with the full weight of his authority as chief. When he finished, Talise translated for Ambrose and Warren. He says Apache broke tribal law, this is true, but she did so defending herself against improper force. Nashoda had no right to compel her physically. Nashoda's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. She refused a match approved by the elders, by you, grandfather. I approved a proposal, not force, Maheo replied through Talise. Our ways do not permit a man to take what is refused, even in marriage. This subtle but significant distinction created an opening, a way for tribal law to bend without breaking. If Nashoda had overstepped his authority in trying to force Apache's compliance, her resistance could be seen as justified rather than rebellious. Warren, growing increasingly frustrated with the tribal deliberations, interrupted again. This is absurd. I have my orders and I intend to carry them out. All three women will return to the reservation with me now. He made a gesture toward his waiting cavalry, who began to advance slowly into the yard. In response, Nashoda's warriors tensed hands, moving to weapons, the fragile negotiation threatening to dissolve into violence. It was Apache who broke the impasse, stepping forward to address both Warren and Nashoda. I will return to the reservation, she announced clearly, of my own will, to face proper judgment from Chief Maheo, not from either of you. Her offer surprised everyone, not least Ambrose, who had seen her determination to remain free at any cost. But there was strategy in her apparent surrender. By accepting Maheo's judgment rather than Nashoda's or Warren's, she was choosing the authority most likely to treat her fairly. Nashoda's eyes narrowed with suspicion. Why would you trust his judgment now when you defied it before? I defied force, not justice, Apache replied steadily. If the chief judges me fairly according to true tribal law, I will accept the consequences. It was a gamble, but one with calculated odds. Maheo had already shown flexibility in his interpretation of tribal law regarding Istas. There was reason to hope he might show similar wisdom in Atakai's case, especially now that he had reclaimed his full authority as chief. Maheo himself seemed impressed by Atakai's courage. He spoke briefly, which Talise translated. He accepts her offer. She will return to the reservation under his personal protection to face judgment before the Council of Elders, not at Nashoda's hand. Warren began to protest, but Maheo cut him off with a gesture of surprising authority. Through Talise, he addressed the lieutenant directly. Chief Maheo says you have accomplished your mission, Lieutenant. The women will return to the reservation, but they do so under his authority, not yours. The matter is now one of tribal governance, not military enforcement. It was a diplomatic solution that allowed Warren to report success while actually ceding control of the situation to Maheo. The lieutenant recognized the maneuver for what it was, his face flushing with anger, but he was outmaneuvered. To insist on taking direct custody of the women now would require him to physically challenge a tribal chief during a ceremonial event, an action that could have serious repercussions with his superiors. Fine, he conceded grudgingly, but I'll be reporting this entire incident to the Indian agent, and if these women leave the reservation again, there won't be any negotiation. With that, he turned on his heel and strode back to his waiting cavalry, his rigid posture expressing the anger he could not openly vent. The immediate threat of military intervention had been averted, but Warren would not forget this humiliation easily. As the cavalry withdrew to a respectful distance, attention returned to the complex dynamics between Maheo Nashoda and the three women. Istas's status was settled as mother of Maheo's great-grandchild. She would return to the tribe with honor. Atakai would face judgment, but under Maheo's protection, rather than Nashoda's authority. But Talisa's situation remained unresolved. The older woman stepped forward, now addressing Maheo directly in Apache. Their exchange was lengthy, with Talise occasionally gesturing toward the ranch house, toward Ambrose, toward the distant mountains. Finally, she turned to Ambrose to translate Maheo's decision. The chief says I have broken tribal law by teaching forbidden knowledge, but he also acknowledges that such knowledge may be necessary for our people's survival in changing times. She paused, something like wonder crossing her weathered face. He offers me a choice: return to the tribe as an elder, to share wisdom but not to teach reading, or remain here in the borderland as a bridge between worlds. The unexpected option to stay at the ranch rather than return to the reservation took Ambrose by surprise. He looked at Talise, seeing in her eyes the same question she must see in his. Was this what either of them wanted? Before either could speak, Nashoda interrupted, his voice sharp with disbelief. Grandfather, you would allow her to live among the white men, to continue corrupting our ways with their words. Maheo's response was measured but firm, his gaze steady on his grandson, as Talise translated. The world changes, Nashoda. The buffalo disappear. The railways come, the white man's towns grow larger. Our people must learn new ways while honoring the old, or we will vanish like morning mist. It was a progressive view that Nashoda clearly struggled to accept. His face reflected the internal conflict of a man caught between rigid adherence to tradition and the pragmatic recognition that adaptation might be necessary for survival. In the end, it was not Nashoda but Red Wolf who shattered the fragile peace. The scarred warrior had been watching the proceedings with growing anger, his hand never far from his knife. Now he stepped forward, pointing at Ambrose with naked hatred. "He is the enemy!" Red Wolf shouted in accented English. "A soldier who killed our people, and you would make peace with him." Ambrose tensed, recognizing the dangerous shift in energy. Red Wolf was not interested in diplomatic solutions or nuanced interpretations of tribal law. He wanted blood, specifically Ambrose's. Maheo spoke sharply to his warrior, but Red Wolf was beyond the reach of authority now. He continued in English, perhaps wanting Ambrose to understand every word. "I know this man, Captain Sullivan, who led the raid on Blackwater Creek. 30 of our people died that day, women, children, old ones." His scarred face contorted with rage. "My family died there." The accusation hung in the air like smoke, changing the atmosphere instantly. All eyes turned to Ambrose, even Talisa's, a new wariness in her gaze. "Is this true?" she asked quietly. Ambrose felt the weight of history pressing down on him. Choices made, orders followed, consequences that could never be undone. "I was there," he acknowledged grimly. "But it wasn't as he describes. We were pursuing a war party that had attacked a settlement. We didn't know there were families in the canyon." "Lies," Red Wolf spat. "You surrounded our camp at dawn, fired on sleeping people. I alone survived, hidden beneath my mother's body." The brutal image silenced everyone. Even Nashoda seemed taken aback by the raw hatred in his lieutenant's voice, the personal vendetta that had clearly been burning for years. "I left the army after Blackwater Creek," Ambrose said quietly. "What happened there, it haunts me still." But Red Wolf was beyond reason or remorse. With a guttural cry, he drew his knife and lunged toward the porch, toward Ambrose. What happened next unfolded with the strange clarity of moments when time seems to slow. Ambrose reached for his sidearm knowing he would be too late. Nashota moved to intercept his lieutenant, but the distance was too great. It was Apache who acted most decisively. Standing nearest to Red Wolf's path, she stepped directly into his way, meeting his charge with the calm focus of a warrior. As his knife arced toward her, she moved with fluid grace, deflecting his wrist with one hand, while the other delivered a precise strike to his throat. Red Wolf staggered, gasping, but his momentum carried him forward. The knife caught Apache's arm, opening a long gash, but she did not falter. Her second strike hit his solar plexus, dropping him to his knees. The confrontation was over almost as quickly as it had begun. Red Wolf knelt in the dust, fighting for breath, his knife fallen beside him. Apache stood over him, blood streaming from her arm, but her expression composed, controlled. "Enough," she said simply. Nashota recovered from his surprise and moved quickly to secure his lieutenant, kicking the knife away and grasping Red Wolf's arms. Two other warriors came forward to help restrain the still struggling man. Maheo observed the entire scene with keen attention, his expression revealing nothing. When order was restored, he spoke at length, his words carrying the weight of formal judgment. Talise translated for Ambrose. "The chief says Red Wolf has broken sacred law by attacking during a peace council. His rage is understood but not excused. He will face punishment according to tribal custom." She paused, then continued. "And he says Apache has shown the courage and restraint of a true warrior. She could have killed Red Wolf but chose to subdue him instead. This will be remembered when her judgment comes before the council." It was a significant acknowledgement, one that might well save Apache's life when she returned to face tribal justice. By defending Ambrose, a former enemy, against an unjustified attack, she had demonstrated both skill and wisdom, qualities the tribe valued, even as they insisted on conformity in other areas. Istas moved quickly to Apache's side, tearing a strip from her dress to bind the bleeding wound. The two women exchanged a look of understanding. They had traveled a long road together, from fugitives to something approaching acceptance, if not yet full reconciliation with their people. As the sun sank lower toward the horizon, bathing the scene in golden light, Maheo announced that it was time for the naming ceremony to proceed. Despite the tension and violence of the preceding events, this sacred ritual would not be postponed. Warriors and soldiers alike were instructed to maintain a respectful distance as Maheo, Talisa Istas, with baby Dawn Apache, and Ambrose gathered on the porch. The chief produced a small pouch of sacred herbs, lighting them with a flame Talise provided. The pungent smoke curled upward as Maheo began to chant in the ancient language of his ancestors. The ceremony was brief, but powerful, the chief's weathered hands gently touching Dawn's forehead, her heart, her tiny palms. He spoke her name in Apache, she who brings light, acknowledging both her given English name and her place within the tribe. When it was complete, Maheo turned to address the assembled witnesses, speaking first in Apache for his warriors, then in English for the benefit of Warren and his men who maintained their position at the edge of the property. "This child bridges two worlds," he declared, his voice carrying across the yard. "Born of Apache blood but on white man's soil. In her I see the future of our people, not separate, not at war, but finding a way to walk together under the same sky." It was a radical vision, one that clearly made both Nashota and Warren uncomfortable, though for different reasons. But in the gathering dusk, with the infant's presence, a tangible reminder of continuity and hope, even the most hardened among them seemed to feel the power of the moment. Maheo concluded by announcing that Istas and Dawn would return to the reservation under his personal protection to be acknowledged as family before the tribe. Apache would accompany them to face judgment before the Council of Elders, with Maheo's testimony regarding her actions this day. And Talise here, the old chief paused, looking to the woman who had served as translator and diplomat throughout the crisis. He spoke directly to her in Apache, a question rather than a command. After a moment's consideration, Talise replied with quiet dignity, then turned to Ambrose. "The chief asks where I choose to walk with the tribe as an elder who has seen both worlds, or here in the borderland as a keeper of knowledge." Ambrose realized that she was not merely translating Maheo's question, but asking one of her own. Would he welcome her presence at the ranch, not as a fugitive seeking temporary shelter, but as a permanent resident, a companion in the solitude he had maintained for 5 years? The answer came to him with surprising clarity. "The choice is yours," he said, "but you would be welcome here. Eleanor would have wanted that." Talise studied him, reading truth in his eyes. Then she turned back to Maheo, speaking in Apache with quiet certainty. The chief nodded, accepting her decision with the gravity it deserved. "I will remain here," she announced to the others, "to continue Eleanor's work, to be a bridge between worlds as Dawn will be when she grows." Nashota's face darkened at this declaration, but he made no protest. Perhaps the events of the day had begun to erode his certainty, to plant seeds of doubt about the absolute nature of tribal law. Or perhaps he simply recognized that some battles could not be won through force alone. As twilight deepened into dusk, preparations were made for departure. Istas gathered the few possessions she would take back to the reservation, wrapping Dawn securely for the journey. Apache stood straight backed as Talise finished binding her wounded arm, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts about returning to face tribal judgment. In a quiet moment before they left, Istas approached Ambrose, Dawn sleeping peacefully in her arms. "You saved us," she said simply. I will tell my daughter of this when she is old enough to understand, of the man who stood between worlds to protect her. It was Eleanor who saved you, Ambrose corrected gently. Her work, her vision. I just continued what she began. Istas nodded, understanding the truth in his words. Then I will tell Dawn of two bridges, Eleanor who built the first span and you who completed it. The image struck Ambrose forcibly, a bridge across the divide that had separated peoples and cultures, built not through political treaties or military force, but through individual acts of courage and compassion. Perhaps that was Eleanor's true legacy, more lasting than the ranch or the garden, or even the memories of their brief life together. As the Apache party prepared to depart, Warren approached Ambrose one final time, his expression cold, but controlled. This isn't over, Sullivan, he warned quietly. The Army doesn't look kindly on civilians who interfere with military operations. There was no interference, Ambrose replied evenly. The women are returning to the reservation voluntarily under tribal authority. Your mission is accomplished. Warren's eyes narrowed. For now, but I'll be watching this place. One wrong move, one hint of further defiance, and neither tribal ceremony nor frontier justice will protect you. With that, he turned on his heel and strode back to his waiting cavalry. The soldiers mounted up Warren, barking orders that sent them into formation for the return journey to Fort Lincoln. As the cavalry departed to the south, Maheo led his people eastward toward the reservation. Istas rode double with a female warrior, Dawn secured safely in a traditional cradleboard. Atakai rode alone, her back straight, her gaze fixed on the horizon rather than looking back at what she was leaving behind. Nashoda and his warriors followed with Red Wolf bound and under guard. The war chief paused once, looking back at the ranch where so much had changed in the space of a day. His eyes met Ambrose's briefly, not with the hatred of before, but with something more complex, a reluctant acknowledgement perhaps that change came whether one welcomed it or not. Then he was gone, the procession disappearing into the gathering darkness, leaving Ambrose and Talise standing alone on the porch of the ranch house. The silence that settled over the property was profound after the tensions of the day. Stars emerged one by one in the deepening blue of the sky, the familiar constellations that had witnessed so much change on this small patch of earth over the generations. What happens now? Talise asked quietly. Ambrose looked out over the land that had been his solitary domain for 5 years, the corrals, the garden, the distant fence line marking the boundary of his property. It all looked different somehow, as if the events of the past few days had altered not just his perspective, but the very nature of the place itself. We rebuild, he said finally, not just fences and barns, but something new, a place where knowledge can be shared, where bridges can be built. Talise nodded, understanding in her wise eyes. Eleanor's work continues. And yours, Ambrose acknowledged, teaching healing, building connections across divides. The weight of grief that had pressed on him for 5 years seemed lighter somehow, not gone, but transformed. The memories of Eleanor and Sarah remained precious and painful in equal measure, but they no longer defined the boundaries of his existence. There was work to be done, a future to be shaped, connections to be forged where divisions had long stood. As night fell fully over the land, Ambrose lit the lamp on the porch, a beacon in the darkness visible from both the town to the west and the reservation to the east. A small light perhaps against the vast darkness of historical enmity and misunderstanding. But even small lights, if tended faithfully, could guide travelers safely across the most difficult terrain. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, the hard work of creating something that had never existed before. But tonight, in this moment of quiet after storm, there was a sense of possibility that Ambrose had not felt since the day he had returned to find his world in ashes. The circle had not closed but opened, expanding to include new lives, new purposes, new hopes. And in that opening lay the promise of healing, not just for one man's wounded heart, but perhaps in some small way for the wounded land itself and the divided peoples who called it home.